On the night of October 17th, 1981, 12 men set out from Gloucester Harbour on what should have been a routine fishing run. By sunrise on October 18th, all 12 were dead. Their boats had gone down within 90 minutes of each other, 3 miles from shore, in water calm enough to see your reflection. The Coast Guard recovered the bodies over 3 days. Some washed up on Good Harbour Beach, others were pulled from the rocks near Eastern Point. One was found tangled in his own nets, still gripping a radio that had stopped working hours before he needed it most. The men who did this were not criminals. They were not smugglers or pirates or drug runners. They were Vincent Russo and his 3 sons, third-generation fishermen, Navy veterans. Men who had pulled drowning sailors from these same waters. Men who went to Mass every Sunday at Our Lady of Good Voyage and put money in the collection plate with hands that smelled of diesel and salt. The reason behind it all? 200 square miles of ocean. Lobster territory that had belonged to the Russo family since Vincent's grandfather first dropped a trap in 1922. Coordinates passed from father to son like a family heirloom, and one man's unshakable belief that the sea has its own laws older than any court could write. What happened in Gloucester that October was not a tragedy, it was a reckoning. The kind of blood debt that fishing families had been settling for centuries, long before the government started drawing lines on maps and calling it jurisdiction. If you stay until the end of this story, you will understand why 12 men had to perish. You will understand why an entire community, quietly and privately, refused to condemn the men who did it. And you will ask yourself a question that has no easy answer. What would you do to protect something your grandfather built, your father preserved, and you swore to pass on to your sons? Before we get to that night on the water, you need to understand what Gloucester was in 1981, what the sea meant to the families who worked it, and why a man like Vincent Russo could look at 12 bodies and feel not guilt, but the cold satisfaction of a debt finally paid. The story begins 60 years earlier, when a Sicilian immigrant named Enzo Russo stepped off a boat in Boston Harbour with nothing but a knife, a pocket Bible, and the knowledge of waters he had never seen. Gloucester sits on the southern edge of Cape Ann, a rocky fist of land that punches out into the Atlantic about 30 miles north of Boston. The harbour curves inward like a bent arm, protecting the boats inside from the worst of what the ocean can throw at them. On clear days, you can see all the way to the horizon. On foggy mornings, which is most mornings from September through November, you cannot see the end of the pier. In 1981, 27,000 people called Gloucester home. Most of them lived within walking distance of the water. The houses climbed up from the harbour in rows, wooden clapboard structures painted white or grey, or that particular shade of blue that fades to nothing after a few winters of salt spray. The streets were narrow, built for horses and carts, never properly widened for the pickup trucks that now squeezed past each other with inches to spare. The town had been built on fish. That was not a metaphor. The very first settlement, back in 1623, was a fishing camp. Before Plymouth Rock, before the Pilgrims, before anyone thought to plant a flag and call this place America, men were pulling cod from these waters and salting it for the trip back to England. 358 years of fishing, longer than the nation itself. By 1981, more than 10,000 Gloucester men had been lost to the sea. Their names were carved into a memorial on Stacey Boulevard, a bronze fisherman gripping a ship's wheel, staring out at the water that had taken so many. Every family in town had lost someone. Grandfathers, fathers, brothers, sons. The ocean gave and the ocean took, and nobody who fished these waters ever forgot that simple truth. October in Gloucester meant temperatures dropping into the low 40s at night and climbing to maybe 55 by afternoon if the sun broke through. The air carried 3 smells that never went away. Salt, always salt, so thick you could taste it on your lips. Diesel exhaust from the boats idling in the harbour before dawn. And fish. Not the clean smell of fresh catch, but the deeper smell of the processing plants, the gut piles behind the warehouses, the decades of scales and blood soaked into the wooden piers until they carried the scent like a permanent stain. The fog came in most mornings, rolling off the Atlantic in grey walls that swallowed the harbour. You could hear the buoys clanging before you could see them. The cry of gulls fighting over scraps sounded distant and close at the same time, the fog playing tricks with the noise. Boat engines rumbled in the murk, invisible until they emerged 20 feet from the pier, captains navigating by memory and instinct through water they had worked since childhood. The people who fished these waters were not the families whose names sat on university buildings in Boston. They were immigrants and the children of immigrants, people who had come to America with nothing and found that the ocean did not care where you were born or how you spoke or whether you could read. The ocean only cared whether you could work. The Sicilians started arriving in the 1880s. They came from fishing villages on an island where the sea was life and death, the same as it was here. They brought their skills, their boats, their recipes, their saints. By 1981, roughly 80% of the commercial fishermen working out of Gloucester were Italian, most of them Sicilian, many of them speaking Italian on their boats, even though they had been born in Massachusetts. On 26 vessels, Italian was the only language spoken from the time they left the harbour until the time they returned. The Portuguese came too, from the Azores mostly, settling in clusters along the waterfront, building their own churches, keeping their own traditions. They were fewer in number than the Sicilians, maybe 10% of the fishing population, but they worked the same waters and faced the same risks and buried their dead in the same cemeteries when the sea decided to collect. These two communities did not mix easily. They attended different churches, they celebrated different festivals, they married within their own kind and raised their children to do the same. But they shared one thing that ran deeper than language or religion or the old country grudges their grandparents still muttered about after too much wine. They shared the code. The code was not written anywhere. You would not find it in any law book or town ordinance or federal regulation. But every fisherman in Gloucester knew it the same way they knew the tide charts, the same way they knew which rocks would tear your hull open and which channels would carry you safe to open water. The code said that territory belonged to the families who had worked it first. If your grandfather set traps in certain waters, those waters belonged to your family. If your father fished a particular bank, that bank was yours by inheritance. The coordinates passed down like property, like heirlooms, like the family name itself. The code said you did not set your traps on another man's ground. You did not run your nets through waters that belonged to someone else. You did not take what was not yours, and if you did, you accepted the consequences that came with the taking. The code said that disputes were settled between the men involved, not by lawyers or judges or police officers who had never held a net in their lives. If someone wronged you, you handled it. If someone stole from you, you took back what was yours and added interest for the insult. The sea was older than any government, and the laws of the sea were older still. For generations, this system had worked. Not peacefully, not without blood, but it had worked. Families knew their place. Boundaries were respected. When a young man wanted to start fishing, he did not simply buy a boat and drop his traps wherever he pleased. He earned his spot, working as crew for years, waiting for territory to open up through death or retirement, or the slow negotiation of family alliances. Then, in 1976, everything changed. That year, the federal government passed the Fishery Conservation and Management Act. The politicians called it a victory for American fishermen. For decades, foreign fleets had been stripping the waters clean. Soviet factory ships, Japanese trawlers, vessels from a dozen nations running operations so massive they could process fish faster than American boats could catch them. Between 1960 and 1970, American fishermen watched their share of the catch on George Bank drop from 88% to 10%. They were being driven out of their own waters. The new law fixed that problem. It extended American jurisdiction to 200 miles offshore and kicked out the foreign competition. No more Soviet factory ships, no more Japanese trawlers. The fish belonged to Americans now. In Gloucester, the old-timers celebrated. Finally, they thought. Finally, the government had done something right. The waters would recover. The fish would come back. The families who had worked these banks for generations would prosper again. They were half right. The fish did come back. But so did everyone else. When word spread that the foreign fleets were gone, when the newspapers started writing about the new gold rush in the Atlantic, when laid-off factory workers and unemployed mill hands started calculating how much money a man could make with a boat and some nets, the harbours began to fill. In 1976, 590 commercial vessels fished the New England waters. By 1981, that number had grown past 1,000. New boats appeared every month. Some were owned by experienced fishermen expanding their operations. Many more were owned by desperate men who had never pulled a net in their lives, men who had lost their jobs in the recession and saw the ocean as their only chance. These newcomers did not know the code. Some of them had never heard of it. Others had heard and did not care. They saw empty water and dropped their traps. They saw productive banks and ran their nets. They did not ask permission. They did not negotiate for territory. They simply took what they wanted because nobody had told them they could not. The old families watched this happen with growing rage. Waters their grandfathers had claimed were suddenly crowded with strangers. Traps that had sat undisturbed for decades were now tangled with the lines of men who had been selling insurance 6 months earlier. The careful system of territories and agreements that had kept the peace for generations was collapsing under the weight of too many boats chasing too few fish. By 1981, the tension had reached the breaking point. You might ask why the authorities did nothing, why the Coast Guard did not intervene, why the police did not restore order, why someone in a uniform did not simply enforce the law and settle these disputes before they turned bloody. The answer is simple. There was no law to enforce. The territorial system was not legal. It had no standing in any court. When a Sicilian fisherman complained that a Portuguese newcomer had set traps in his family's waters, the Coast Guard shrugged. The water belongs to everyone, they said. First come, first served. If you want to claim exclusive rights to a piece of ocean, buy a lawyer and file for a lease. Otherwise, there is nothing we can do. The police were no better. Gloucester had a small force, 15 officers responsible for 27,000 residents spread across a town that had more coastline than streets. They handled drunk drivers and domestic disputes and the occasional bar fight on a Saturday night. They did not handle fishing territory complaints. That was a federal matter, they said. Talk to the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard station sat in Boston, an hour south by car, longer by boat. They patrolled when they could, which was not often. Their jurisdiction covered thousands of square miles of open water. A complaint about trap placement ranked somewhere below smuggling, below safety violations, below the 100 other emergencies that demanded their attention every day. Vincent Russo made 14 calls over the course of 3 months. He called the Coast Guard 7 times. He called the harbour master 4 times. He called a lawyer twice. He even called his congressman once, sitting in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, listening to a recording tell him to leave a message after the tone. Nothing happened. Nothing ever happened. The system that should have protected him did not exist. By October of 1981, Vincent Russo had stopped expecting help from anyone. The water that his grandfather had claimed in 1922, the territory that had fed 3 generations of his family, was being stripped clean by men who had no right to be there. Every morning he watched boats he did not recognize heading out to banks his father had shown him when he was 7 years old. Every evening he counted his catch and found it smaller than the week before. He was 51 years old. He had 3 sons who expected to inherit what he had inherited. He had a wife who trusted him to provide. He had a name that meant something in this town, a reputation built over 3 decades of honest work and fair dealing. And he had a choice to make. The men who were taking from him would not stop. The authorities would not make them stop. The law, such as it was, protected the thieves and abandoned the rightful owners. That left only the code, the old code. The code that said a man protects what is his, no matter the cost. Vincent Russo knew what the code demanded. He had known since the first time a stranger's trap appeared in his waters. He had simply been waiting, hoping, praying that some other solution would present itself. By October, he had stopped waiting. Vincent Antonio Russo was born in Gloucester on March 15, 1930. the second son of Enzo Russo and Maria Conti. His birth certificate listed his father's occupation as fisherman. His grandfather's occupation had been fisherman. If anyone had bothered to trace the line back to Sicily, they would have found fishermen all the way down, generation after generation, men who made their living from the water because the water was all they had. By October of 1981, Vincent was 51 years old. He stood 6 feet tall, though he did not stand fully straight anymore. 30 years of hauling nets and lifting traps had curved his spine forward, bent his shoulders into a permanent hunch that made him look like he was always leaning into the wind. His arms were thick and ropey, the muscles built not in any gymnasium, but through decades of physical labor that started before dawn and ended after dark. His hands were enormous, the knuckles swollen and misshapen from breaks that had never healed properly, the palms calloused so thick the skin had turned yellow and hard as leather. His face told the story of his life. Deep lines cut from the corners of his eyes, the kind of lines that come from squinting into sun and spray for more years than most men work at anything. His skin had weathered to the colour and texture of old wood, brown and rough, and permanently marked by wind and salt. A scar ran along his jaw on the left side, a thin white line that started below his ear and ended at the point of his chin. He had gotten that scar in 1968, in a place called the Mekong Delta, when a piece of shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade missed his throat by 2 inches. Vincent did not talk about Vietnam. He had served 4 years in the Navy, most of it on river patrol boats running missions up waterways so narrow the jungle touched both sides. He had learned things there that a fisherman should never have to learn: how to move quietly through darkness, how to disable an engine without making a sound, how to wait for hours without moving, watching, calculating, and then act with a speed and violence that left no room for hesitation. He came home in 1969 with a bronze star he kept in a drawer, a scar he saw every morning in the mirror, and dreams that woke him in the middle of the night, reaching for a weapon that was not there. The Navy had taken a fisherman and turned him into something else. When he returned to Gloucester, he tried to become a fisherman again. Mostly he succeeded, but the something else never fully went away. Every morning, Vincent woke at 4:30. He did not use an alarm clock. His body simply knew when it was time. He would lie still for a moment, feeling Angela's warmth beside him, listening to her breathing, and then he would slide out of bed without waking her. This had been their routine for 27 years of marriage. In the kitchen, he would make coffee in a percolator that had belonged to his mother. The machine was older than his son's, dented and discoloured, but it still worked, and he saw no reason to replace something that still worked. He would sit at the kitchen table in the dark, not turning on the lights, drinking coffee so strong it left a bitter film on his tongue. He would smoke 1 cigarette, rolling it himself from a pouch of tobacco he kept in his shirt pocket. The cigarette would last exactly as long as the coffee, and by the time both were finished, the first grey light would be showing through the window. By 5:15, he would be walking down to the harbour. By 5:30, he would be on his boat, checking the engine, checking the nets, checking everything twice because the sea did not forgive carelessness. By 6, he would be heading out past the breakwater, watching the town shrink behind him, feeling the particular peace that only came when land disappeared and there was nothing but water in every direction. This routine had not changed in 30 years, not when his sons were born, not when his father passed, not when the economy collapsed and other men lost their jobs and their homes and their minds. The sea did not care about any of that. The sea only cared that you showed up, that you worked, that you respected what it could give you and what it could take away. What Vincent valued most was not money. He had never had much money. Fishing was not a profession that made men rich. Some years were good, and some years were bad, and most years were somewhere in between, enough to pay the bills and put food on the table and maybe set a little aside for the winter months when the weather kept you in port. What Vincent valued was legacy. The word itself mattered to him, though he would never have used it in conversation. He thought of it as continuity, as connection, as the thread that ran from his grandfather, through his father, through himself, and onward to his sons. 4 generations of Russo men had worked these waters. They had learned the same skills, faced the same dangers, earned their living from the same patches of ocean. When Vincent dropped his traps in the waters off Halibut Point, he was dropping them in the exact coordinates where his grandfather had dropped traps in 1922. The same water, the same work, the same family. That continuity was the only inheritance he had to offer. He owned no property beyond the house his father had left him. He had no savings beyond what sat in a coffee can in the back of his closet. He had no education, no investments, no pension waiting for him when his body finally gave out. All he had was the knowledge of these waters, the territory his family had claimed, and the skills to work them. That was what he would pass to his sons. That was what his sons would pass to their sons. That was what made the Russo name mean something in a town where names were all that most families had. Angela Maria Russo had been Angela Maria Ferrante before she married Vincent in 1954. She was 49 years old now, 3 years younger than her husband, though the difference seemed larger. Her hair had gone grey early, and she wore it pulled back in a bun that she had worn the same way for 20 years. Her face was lined but still beautiful, the kind of beauty that had less to do with features than with expression, with the warmth in her eyes and the way her mouth settled into a natural, almost smile, even when she was not thinking about anything in particular. She had grown up in Gloucester, daughter of a fisherman, granddaughter of a fisherman, raised to understand that the men in her life would leave before dawn and might not come back. She had buried her father when she was 16, lost to a storm off Georges Bank. She had buried her brother when she was 22, lost to an engine fire that spread too fast for anyone to escape. She had learned to live with the particular fear that fishing wives carried, the fear that sharpened every time the weather turned bad and dulled but never disappeared even on the calmest days. In 27 years of marriage, she had never once asked Vincent to stop fishing. She understood that asking would be pointless. Fishing was not what Vincent did. Fishing was what Vincent was. You might as well ask him to stop breathing. She worked part-time at the fish processing plant on Harbour Loop, sorting and packing the catch that the boats brought in. The work was cold and wet and smelled so strongly that the smell followed her home and sank into her clothes and her hair and her skin. She did not mind. The money helped, and the work kept her connected to the rhythm of the harbour, let her know which boats had come in and which were still out, let her hear the gossip that moved through the fishing community like tide through a channel. Vincent and Angela had 3 sons. All 3 had been raised on the water, taught to handle a boat before they could drive a car, trained in the skills that their father had learned from his father, and his father had learned from his father before him. Dominic was the oldest at 29. He had his father's build, tall and broad and permanently hunched from work that bent you whether you wanted to bend or not. He had served in the Navy like his father, though he had never seen combat, spending his 4 years on a supply ship running between San Diego and Pearl Harbor. He was married now to a girl named Rosa, whose family had been in Gloucester almost as long as the Russos. They had 2 children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2, and Rosa was expecting a 3rd in the spring. Dominic worked his own boat, a 32-footer he had bought with money saved over 6 years of working as crew on other men's vessels. He fished the family waters, running his traps in the same coordinates his father used, selling his catch to the same buyers his father sold to. In another 20 years he would be his father. He accepted this. He wanted this. The continuity that Vincent valued, Dominic valued too. Anthony was 26, the middle son, quieter than his brothers, and more thoughtful. He was the one who read books, who asked questions, who sometimes wondered aloud whether there might be more to life than the cycle of boats and nets and fish that had defined every generation of his family. He had almost left Gloucester after high school, almost taken a scholarship to a state college in Boston, almost become something other than what his father and grandfather had been. In the end, he had stayed. He told himself it was because the family needed him, because his father was getting older and his brothers could not handle the work alone. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. He stayed because leaving felt like betrayal, because the thought of his father watching him drive away towards some other life was more than he could bear. Because the thread of continuity that Vincent valued had wrapped itself around Anthony too, and he did not have the strength to cut it. Marco was the youngest at 22. He was built differently than his brothers, shorter and leaner, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's scarred hands. He had never served in the military. By the time he was old enough to enlist, the draft had ended and the war was over, and there seemed to be no reason to volunteer for something that had given his father nightmares and his oldest brother 4 years of tedious labor on a supply ship. Marco was the one who still believed the future held something better. He talked about buying a bigger boat, about expanding into new territory, about building the family operation into something larger than what his grandfather had started. He had energy and ambition, and the particular optimism that comes from being young enough to think that hard work and good intentions are enough to guarantee success. Vincent watched his youngest son and saw himself at that age, saw the same hunger, the same drive, the same certainty that the world would reward those who earned their rewards. He did not have the heart to tell Marco that the world did not work that way, that the world took from those who had and gave to those who took. That optimism was a luxury that fishing families could not afford. The Carvalho family had arrived in Gloucester in the spring of 1980. They were not strangers to fishing. Manuel Carvalho, the father, had worked boats in New Bedford for 15 years before the mill job brought him north. His sons, Carlos and Joaquin and Paulo and Roberto, had all spent time on the water, though none of them had fished full-time. They were workers, labourers, men who took whatever jobs paid and did whatever work was available. Manuel was 45 years old, shorter than Vincent, and broader through the chest, with thick forearms and a beard that had gone mostly grey. He had come to America from the Azores when he was 19, following an uncle who had promised work and opportunity and a chance at something better than the poverty waiting for him in the old country. He had found work. He had found opportunity. Whether he had found something better depended on how you measured better. The mill job had lasted 11 years, good years mostly. Steady paycheck, union benefits, enough money to buy a house and raise 4 sons and put a little aside for the future. Then the mill had cut shifts. Then the mill had cut workers. Then the mill had closed entirely, another victim of the recession that was grinding through New England like a slow disaster, shutting factories and emptying towns and leaving men like Manuel with nothing but skills that nobody wanted to pay for anymore. Manuel had tried other work, construction when he could find it, day labor when he could not. But the jobs were scarce and the competition was fierce, and by the winter of 1980 he was 3 months behind on his mortgage, and his wife was crying at the kitchen table, and his sons were looking at him with expressions that asked questions he could not answer. The boat had been his brother's idea. Fernando Carvalho still lived in New Bedford, still fished, still made a living from the water even when everything else fell apart. "Fishing always needs men," Fernando said. "The fish do not care about recessions. Buy a boat, come work with me. I will teach your boys what they need to know." Manuel had used the last of his savings to buy a boat, 34 feet, diesel engine, equipped for lobster and groundfish both. It was not a new boat. It was not even a good boat. But it floated, and it ran, and it represented the only chance Manuel could see for keeping his family together. He had brought his sons to Gloucester because Gloucester was closer than New Bedford, because the house he was about to lose was in Gloucester, because starting over in a new town seemed harder than starting over in a place where at least he knew the streets and the stores and the way the fog rolled in off the harbour on October mornings. Manuel Carvalho was not a bad man. He was a desperate man, which is a different thing. He had 4 sons who needed work. He had a wife who needed to know they would not lose their home. He had a boat that represented every dollar he had ever saved, every sacrifice he had ever made, every hope he had left for a future that did not involve poverty and failure and watching his family fall apart. When Manuel looked at the waters off Cape Ann, he did not see territory. He did not see boundaries. He did not see the invisible lines that families like the Russos had drawn generations ago. He saw opportunity. He saw fish. He saw the only chance he had. He dropped his traps where the fishing looked good. He ran his nets where other boats seemed to be finding success. He did not ask permission because it never occurred to him that permission was required. The ocean belonged to everyone. That was what the Coast Guard said. That was what the law said. First come, first served. Manuel Carvalho did not know about the code. Nobody had told him. Nobody had warned him. He was an outsider, a newcomer, a man without connections to the networks of family and tradition that governed life on the Gloucester waterfront. He was just trying to survive, just trying to feed his family, just trying to find some way forward when every other path had closed. This is what made the tragedy so complete. Manuel Carvalho was not a villain. He was not evil or greedy or deliberately cruel. He was a father doing what fathers do, fighting for his children, sacrificing for his family, working himself to exhaustion for the chance to give them something better than what he had. In another story, Manuel Carvalho might have been the hero. A hard-working immigrant, struggling against impossible odds, refusing to give up no matter how many times the world knocked him down. The kind of man whose determination we admire, whose persistence we celebrate, whose eventual success we cheer for. But this is not that story. This is the story of what happens when two desperate men, both fighting for their families, both doing what they believe is right, find themselves on opposite sides of a line that only one of them knows exists. Manuel Carvalho did not know he was stealing from Vincent Russo. He did not know that the waters where he dropped his traps had belonged to the Russo family for 60 years. He did not know that every trap he set, every fish he caught, every dollar he earned was taken directly from men who had worked those waters since before Manuel was born. And Vincent Russo did not know that Manuel Carvalho was just trying to survive. Did not know about the mill closing, about the mortgage payments, about the wife crying at the kitchen table. Did not know that the man he saw as a thief was actually a father, just like him, a provider, just like him, a man trying to pass something on to his sons, just like him. They were the same, these two men. That was the tragedy. They were exactly the same, fighting for exactly the same things, and the world had put them on a collision course that neither of them could avoid. By October of 1981, the Carvalho family had been fishing Russo waters for 6 months. Manuel and his 4 sons worked 7 days a week, dropping and pulling traps, running nets, selling their catch to whoever would buy it. They were making money. Not enough to catch up on the mortgage, not yet, but enough to slow the bleeding, enough to keep the lights on and the food on the table, enough to give Manuel hope that maybe they would get through this. The Russo family had watched this happen with growing fury. Vincent had tried talking first, had approached Manuel on the dock one afternoon in May, explained the situation calmly and clearly. "These are our waters. My family has fished here for 60 years. You need to find somewhere else." Manuel had listened politely and then done nothing. "The Coast Guard says the water belongs to everyone," he had replied. "I have as much right to fish here as you do. I am sorry if that is inconvenient, but I have a family to feed." Vincent had tried warning next, had told Manuel, in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, that continuing to fish Russo waters would have consequences, had explained what happened to men who violated the code, had given Manuel every opportunity to make a different choice. Manuel had ignored the warnings, not out of courage, not out of defiance, but out of desperation. He had nowhere else to go. The other fishing grounds were either claimed by other families or too far from port to be profitable. The Russo waters were the only waters that made sense for his operation. If he could not fish there, he could not fish at all. And if he could not fish, his family would starve. So he kept fishing, kept dropping his traps in coordinates that had belonged to the Russos since 1922, kept taking fish that Vincent Russo considered his by right of inheritance, kept making a choice that he did not even understand was a choice. And Vincent Russo kept watching, kept counting his diminishing catch, kept calculating how much he was losing to the Carvalhos every week, every month, kept feeling the pressure build inside him like steam in a boiler, knowing that eventually something would have to give. The other families on the waterfront saw what was happening. They talked about it in low voices on the docks, in the bars, in the churches after Sunday Mass. Everyone knew the Carvalhos were fishing Russo water. Everyone knew Vincent would not tolerate it forever. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Some thought Vincent would back down. He was getting older, they said. Maybe he was going soft. Maybe he would just accept the loss and move on, find new waters, let the Carvalhos have what they had taken. Others knew better. They had known Vincent Russo for decades, had seen the look in his eyes when someone crossed him, had heard the stories from older men who remembered what Vincent's father had done when someone tried to steal his territory back in the 50s. The Russos did not back down. The Russos did not forget. The Russos did not let insults stand unanswered or thefts go unpunished. It was not in their blood. It was not in their code. By October, the ones who knew better were warning their families to stay clear. Something was coming, something bad, something that would remind everyone in Gloucester why the old ways still mattered, why the code still held, why you did not take from families like the Russos without paying a price. The only question was when and how many men would have to learn the lesson before it stuck. The morning of August 14th, 1981, began like any other. Vincent woke at 4:30, made his coffee, smoked his cigarette, and walked down to the harbour in the grey light before dawn. The fog was thick that morning, the kind that made the world feel small and close, like the town had been wrapped in wet cotton, and everything beyond the pier had simply ceased to exist. He took his boat out alone. Dominic was home with Rosa, who had been feeling sick with the pregnancy. Anthony had a doctor's appointment in Boston, something about his back that had been bothering him for months. Marco was sleeping off a late night at one of the bars on Main Street. Vincent did not mind working alone. He had done it for years before his sons were old enough to help, and there was something peaceful about being on the water by himself. No conversation required, no need to be anything other than what he was. He motored out past 10-Pound Island, past the breakwater, into the open water where the fog thinned enough to see maybe 100 yards in any direction. The ocean was calm, barely a ripple, the kind of morning that made you forget what the sea could do when it decided to remind you who was in charge. His traps were set in a line running northeast from Milk Island toward Straitsmouth. 40 traps, marked with orange buoys that carried his permit number and the particular pattern of stripes that identified them as Russo gear. His grandfather had set the first traps in these waters in 1922. His father had worked the same line for 30 years. Vincent had been pulling these coordinates since he was 12 years old, standing beside his father, learning the work that would define his life. He found the first buoy at 6:15, hooked it with the gaff, fed the line into the hauler, waited for the trap to break the surface. The trap came up light. 2 lobsters, both shorts, both thrown back. He checked the bait, found it mostly gone, rebaited and dropped the trap back. The second trap was the same. Light catch, eaten bait, nothing worth keeping. By the 8th trap, Vincent knew something was wrong. His line should have been producing 15-20 pounds of legal lobster per trap at this time of year. He was getting 2-3 pounds if he was lucky. The math did not work. The lobsters had not suddenly disappeared. Someone was pulling his traps before he got to them. He found the proof at trap number 12. The buoy was there, floating exactly where it should be, but when he hauled the trap up, he saw immediately that it was not his. The wire was newer, the mesh tighter, the construction slightly different in ways that only a fisherman would notice. Someone had pulled his trap, taken the catch, and replaced it with an empty trap of their own. They had even attached his buoy to make it look like nothing had changed. Vincent sat in his boat for a long time, holding the trap that was not his, staring at it like it might explain itself. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from exertion, from rage. A rage so deep and so hot that it felt like something physical, like a fire burning in his chest that would consume him if he let it. He knew who had done this. There was only one family desperate enough, stupid enough, new enough to the waters to try something like this. The Carvalhos had been setting their traps closer and closer to Russo territory for months. Vincent had warned them, had told Manuel Carvalho directly, face to face, that these waters were not available, had explained what would happen if the warnings were ignored. Manuel had ignored them anyway. Vincent pulled the rest of his line. 11 of his 40 traps had been swapped, 11 traps worth of catch stolen. At current prices, that was maybe $300, a single morning's theft. But it was not about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the principle, about the code, about 60 years of family history being erased by a man who had been in Gloucester for less than 18 months. Vincent returned to the harbour at 9:30. He tied up his boat, walked to his truck, and drove directly to the Carvalho house on Prospect Street. He did not stop to change his clothes, did not stop to calm down, did not stop to think about what he was going to say or do when he got there. Manuel was in the driveway, working on his truck, when Vincent pulled up. He looked up at the sound of the engine, saw who it was, and his face went carefully blank. The expression of a man who knows trouble has arrived and is trying to decide how to handle it. Vincent got out of his truck. He walked across the cracked concrete of the driveway until he was standing 3 feet from Manuel Carvalho, close enough to smell the oil on Manuel's hands, close enough to see the pulse beating in Manuel's throat. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They just looked at each other. 2 fathers, 2 fishermen, 2 men who had been put on opposite sides of a line by circumstances neither of them had chosen. "You pulled my traps," Vincent said. His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who has already decided what he is going to do and is simply going through the formalities first. Manuel wiped his hands on a rag, took his time answering. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "I do not know what you are talking about. 11 of my traps, swapped out, your gear in their place." Manuel shook his head. "I did not touch your traps." Vincent took a step closer. Manuel did not back away, but his body tensed, weight shifting onto the balls of his feet, hands coming up slightly from his sides. "I am going to say this once," Vincent said. "Stay out of my waters. I do not care where you fish. I do not care how you feed your family. But stay out of my waters. If I find your gear in my territory again, there will be consequences." Manuel's jaw tightened. The fear in his eyes was being replaced by something else. Pride, maybe. Anger. The particular stubbornness of a man who has been pushed too far for too long and has decided he will not be pushed any further. "The Coast Guard says those waters belong to everyone. I have a permit. I have a license. I have as much right to fish there as you do." Vincent smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who has heard something so foolish, so ignorant, so completely wrong that he cannot quite believe it was said out loud. "The Coast Guard," Vincent repeated. "You think the Coast Guard is going to help you? I think the law is the law." "The law?" Vincent laughed, a short, hard sound with no humor in it. "Let me tell you about the law. The law is in Boston. The law is 40 miles away. The law does not care about you or me or anyone else on this waterfront. You want to hide behind the law, go ahead. See how much the law protects you when the time comes. Is that a threat? It is a fact. You are fishing another man's waters. You are taking food from another man's family. Where I come from, there is a word for that. Where I come from, there are consequences for that." Manuel straightened up. He was shorter than Vincent, but he did not look small. He looked like a man who had made his decision and would not be moved from it. "I have a family too," Manuel said. 4 sons, a wife, a mortgage I cannot pay. You want me to stop fishing, you tell me how I am supposed to feed them. You tell me where I am supposed to go. Because I have looked, Russo. I have looked for 6 months. There is nowhere else. Your waters are the only waters that make sense for my boat. So you can threaten me all you want. You can tell me about consequences. But I am not going anywhere. Because if I stop fishing, my family starves. And I would rather face your consequences than watch my children go hungry." The two men stared at each other. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, filled with everything that had been said and everything that had not. Finally, Vincent nodded, slowly, like he was acknowledging something, like he was making a decision. "Then you have made your choice," he said. He turned and walked back to his truck. Got in, started the engine, pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Manuel Carvalho stood in his driveway, watching the truck disappear around the corner, and felt something cold settle into his stomach. He had won the argument. He had stood his ground. He had refused to back down. But he had not won anything. He knew that. He had seen the look in Vincent Russo's eyes, the absolute certainty, the complete absence of doubt. Manuel Carvalho had made his choice, and now he would have to live with whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a slow escalation. Every few days, Vincent would find evidence that the Carvalhos had been in his waters. Traps moved, lines tangled. Catch that should have been his ending up at the processing plant under someone else's name. He tried going through proper channels. He was not a violent man by nature. He had learned violence in Vietnam, but he had spent 12 years trying to forget those lessons. He wanted to believe there was another way, wanted to believe the system would work if he just gave it a chance. On August 19th, he called the Coast Guard station in Boston, explained the situation, gave coordinates, dates, evidence. The officer on the phone was polite but unhelpful. "I am sorry, sir, but territorial disputes are a civil matter. We do not have jurisdiction over where individual fishermen set their traps. You might try talking to a lawyer." On August 22nd, he called the harbour master in Gloucester. The harbour master was a man named Bill Denton, 62 years old, who had held the position for 15 years. Bill knew the situation, knew the families involved, knew exactly what was happening and exactly what it would lead to. "Vincent, I cannot help you," Bill said. His voice was tired, resigned, the voice of a man who had seen this play out before and knew how it ended. "The waters are open. The Carvalhos have permits. There is nothing I can do officially. Then what am I supposed to do?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, "You know what you are supposed to do, Vincent. You know what your father would have done. I am not telling you to do it. I am just saying I cannot stop you. Nobody can stop you. The code is the code." On August 27th, Vincent called a lawyer in Boston, a man named Harrison who specialized in maritime disputes. Harrison listened to the story, asked some questions, and quoted a retainer fee of $5,000. $5,000, Vincent repeated. "That is just to start, Mr. Russo. If this goes to court, you are looking at 10, 15, maybe 20,000 by the time it is over. And I have to be honest with you. The law is not on your side. The waters are technically open. The Carvalhos are not doing anything illegal. A judge might sympathize with your position, but sympathy does not win cases." Vincent hung up without scheduling an appointment. On September 3rd, he called his congressman, sat on hold for 45 minutes, finally reached a junior staffer who took down his information and promised someone would call him back. Nobody called back. On September 8th, September 15th, September 22nd, and September 29th, he called the Coast Guard again. Each time he was told the same thing. Civil matter, no jurisdiction. Talk to a lawyer. 14 calls in 6 weeks. 14 attempts to find a solution that did not involve blood. 14 dead ends. 14 reminders that the system he had trusted, the authorities he had believed in, the laws he had obeyed his entire life, did not care about him or his family or the 60 years of history that was being stolen day by day. By the end of September, Vincent had stopped calling, stopped hoping, stopped believing there was any path forward that did not run through the old code, the ancient code, the code that said a man protects what is his, or he is not a man at all. The Carvalhos kept fishing. They had settled into a routine now. Manuel and his 4 sons going out every morning, working the waters that had belonged to the Russos since before any of them were born, taking and taking and taking, while Vincent watched his catch shrink and his anger grow and his options narrow to a single terrible point. October arrived cold and grey. The temperature dropped, the fog thickened. The tourist season ended, and Gloucester settled into its winter rhythm, the quiet months when the town belonged to the people who lived there year-round, the fishing families and the processing workers, and the men who understood that the sea gave and the sea took, and there was nothing to do but accept both. On the night of October 11th, 1981, Vincent called his sons to the house. They gathered in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Vincent had eaten breakfast every morning for 30 years. Angela was there too, standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, face unreadable. She knew why her sons had been called. She had known for weeks that this moment was coming. She had prayed it would not, had hoped her husband would find another way, had watched that hope die slowly as the calls went unanswered and the traps stayed empty and the look in Vincent's eyes grew harder and colder and more certain. Dominic sat at the head of the table, where Vincent usually sat. Anthony leaned against the counter by the sink, arms folded, watching his father with an expression that was equal parts worry and resignation. Marco sat across from Dominic, still young enough to feel excitement underneath the fear, still naive enough to see what was coming as adventure rather than catastrophe. Vincent stood at the end of the table. He looked at each of his sons in turn. Dominic, who would inherit the family territory. Anthony, who had stayed when he could have left. Marco, who still believed the world rewarded hard work and honest effort. He loved them. That was the thing he wanted them to understand. Everything he had done, everything he was about to do, came from that love, from the need to protect them, to provide for them, to pass on to them the legacy that had been passed to him. "You know why I called you here?" he said. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The Carvalhos are not going to stop. I have tried everything else. I have called the Coast Guard. I have called the harbour master. I have called lawyers and congressmen and everyone else who is supposed to help. Nobody will help. Nobody cares. We are on our own. He paused. Let the words settle into the silence. There is only one way to protect what is ours. Only one way to make sure this family has a future. I am not going to force any of you. This is a choice. If you walk away right now, I will understand. I will not think less of you. I will not love you any less. But if you stay, if you do what I am asking, there is no going back. We cross this line, we are on the other side forever. Whatever happens after, we face it together, as a family, the way Russos have always faced things. Dominic spoke first. He did not hesitate, did not ask for clarification, did not pretend he did not understand. I am with you, Pop. Anthony was slower. He looked at his father for a long moment, and Vincent could see the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to run fighting against the part of him that could not abandon his family. The son who had almost left battling the son who had stayed. What exactly are we talking about? Anthony asked. Vincent told him. Told all of them. Laid out the plan he had been building in his mind for weeks. The details, the method, the timeline, the number of men who would have to pay for what the Carvalhos had done. When he finished, the kitchen was silent. Angela had turned away, her shoulders shaking, though she made no sound. Marco had gone pale, the excitement draining from his face as the reality of what his father was proposing finally sank in. Even Dominic, who had agreed without hesitation, looked like he had swallowed something bitter. Anthony was the one who broke the silence. All of them? Every boat they send out? All of them. Some of those men have children. So do we, Vincent said, and if we do nothing, those children will inherit what should belong to our children. That is how it works, Anthony. That is how it has always worked. The strong take from the weak. The only way to stop being weak is to show them you are strong. Anthony looked at his brothers, at his mother, at the kitchen where he had grown up, where he had eaten thousands of meals, where he had learned what it meant to be a Russo. Then he looked at his father. There has to be another way. There is no other way. I have tried everything else. Pop. Anthony's voice cracked. We are talking about ending people, not threatening them, not hurting them. Ending them. Permanently. We cannot come back from that. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you are asking us to become? Vincent met his son's eyes, held them, let Anthony see everything that was there. The anger, the determination, the grief for what was about to be lost, and the acceptance of what had to be done. I understand better than you think, Vincent said quietly. I have done things you cannot imagine. I have been the person you are afraid of becoming, and I have lived with it. For 12 years, I have lived with it. It does not get easier. It does not go away. You carry it with you forever. But I am still here, still standing, still providing for this family, still passing on what my father passed to me. That is what matters. That is the only thing that matters. Not what we have to do, what we have to protect. Anthony was crying now, silent tears running down his face. He did not wipe them away. I do not know if I can do this, he said. Then do not. Walk away. I meant what I said. I will not think less of you. Anthony shook his head. That is not. I cannot walk away. You know I cannot walk away. This family is everything to me. You are everything to me. But what you are asking, I am asking you to protect your brothers, your mother, your future, the children you will have someday. I am asking you to be a Russo. The words hung in the air, heavy, final, like a door closing on everything that had come before. Anthony wiped his face, took a breath, let it out slowly. When? He asked. Vincent felt something release in his chest. Relief, maybe, or sorrow. He could not tell the difference anymore. 6 days, he said. October 17th. The Carvalhos will all be on the water that night. They are running a double shift to make up for the storms last week. All 5 of their boats, all at once. He looked around the table at his sons, at the men they had become, at the men they were about to become. We leave at midnight, he said. We come home at dawn, and nobody ever speaks of this again. One by one his sons nodded. Dominic first, then Marco, then finally Anthony, his face still wet with tears but his jaw set, his decision made. Angela turned around, looked at her husband, at her sons, at the family she had built and raised and loved for almost 30 years. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. She simply walked to Vincent, put her arms around him, and held on. Held on like she was trying to memorize the feel of him. Like she knew that whatever came back from the water on October 18th would not be the same man who left. Vincent held her too, breathed in the smell of her hair, felt her heart beating against his chest. Then he let go. Because there was work to do, because the code demanded it, because the Russos protected what was theirs, and this was the only way left to protect it. The next 6 days passed like a dream, like a countdown to something inevitable, like the last hours before a storm arrives, when the sky goes dark and the air goes still and everyone knows what is coming, but nobody can do anything except wait. Vincent made his preparations, gathered what he needed, went through the plan again and again in his mind, looking for weaknesses, looking for ways it could go wrong. There were many ways it could go wrong. He tried to account for all of them. His sons made their own preparations, said their own prayers, made their own peace with what they were about to do. Angela cooked, cleaned, went to church twice, lit candles for her husband and her sons and the men who were about to lose their lives. She did not try to stop what was happening. She knew it was beyond stopping now. The decision had been made. The only thing left was the doing. On the morning of October 17th, Vincent woke at 4:30, same as always, made his coffee, smoked his cigarette, watched the sun come up over the harbour. Tonight, he thought. Tonight it ends. He spent the day doing ordinary things. Fixed a leak in the kitchen sink, balanced the checkbook. Had lunch with Angela at the diner on Main Street, the two of them sitting across from each other in a booth by the window, not talking much, just being together. In the afternoon, he went to church, sat in the empty sanctuary for an hour, looking at the crucifix above the altar, thinking about sin and forgiveness and whether God would understand what he was about to do. He did not pray. He was not sure what to pray for. Forgiveness seemed hypocritical when he had no intention of stopping. Success seemed obscene when success meant 12 men would not see the sunrise. Strength seemed like the wrong thing to ask from a God who preached mercy and turning the other cheek. So he just sat. Let the silence surround him. Let the weight of what was coming settle fully onto his shoulders. Then he stood up, crossed himself, and walked out into the October afternoon. Tonight, it would be over. Tonight, the Russos would remind Gloucester why the old code still mattered. Tonight, 12 men would learn the price of taking what did not belong to them, and Vincent Russo would become the thing he had been trying not to become for 12 years. The thing Vietnam had made him. The thing he had hoped to leave behind forever. A man who could take a life and keep walking. The planning began on the morning of October 12th, 5 days before the night itself. Vincent sat at his kitchen table with a nautical chart spread out in front of him, the kind of chart that showed depth contours and current patterns and the location of every rock and shoal within 20 miles of Gloucester Harbour. He had been reading charts like this since he was a boy, could close his eyes and see the waters in his mind, every ridge and channel memorized through decades of working them. He marked the Carvalho fishing grounds with a red pencil. 5 areas, spread across maybe 15 square miles of open water. Manuel and his 4 sons worked in pairs most nights, 2 boats to an area, covering more ground than a single vessel could manage. On October 17th, according to the schedule Vincent had pieced together through weeks of observation, all 5 Carvalho boats would be out. A double shift to make up for the time lost to bad weather the week before. Vincent studied the chart for a long time, traced the routes the Carvalho boats would take from harbour to fishing ground, noted the distances between their positions, calculated how long it would take the Coast Guard to respond to a distress call, assuming anyone managed to send one. The answer was not encouraging, for the Carvalhos, that is. The nearest Coast Guard station was in Boston, 40 miles south. Response time to the waters off Cape Ann, even under ideal conditions, was 90 minutes minimum. On a foggy October night, with multiple boats in distress across a wide area, it could take twice that long. 90 minutes was a long time to be in the water. The Atlantic in October ran about 52 degrees. At that temperature, a man without a survival suit had maybe an hour before hypothermia set in, maybe 2 hours before he lost consciousness, maybe 3 before his heart stopped. Vincent made notes in the margins of the chart, times, distances, temperatures, the cold mathematics of what he was planning. That afternoon, he drove to the hardware store in Beverly, 15 miles down the coast. He paid cash for a set of wire cutters, a hacksaw, and a roll of electrical tape. The clerk was a young man who did not recognize him and did not ask questions. On October 13th, he drove to Salem and bought marine epoxy, the quick-setting kind that hardened underwater. On October 14th, he went to Newburyport and picked up a set of socket wrenches and a portable battery-powered drill. He never bought more than a few items at any one store. Never went to the same town twice. Never used a credit card or wrote a check. By the end of the 3rd day, he had everything he needed, acquired in small pieces from half a dozen different places, impossible to trace back to a single buyer. His sons made their own preparations. Dominic retrieved the family's rifles from the locked cabinet in Vincent's basement. 4 weapons total. A Remington 730-06 that had belonged to Vincent's father. A Winchester Model 70 that Vincent had bought when he came home from Vietnam. A Marlin lever action that Dominic had purchased 5 years ago for deer hunting. And a shotgun, a Remington 870 12-gauge that Anthony kept for home protection. They were not planning to shoot anyone. The rifles were insurance, backup in case something went wrong, in case the Carvalhos fought back harder than expected, in case the plan fell apart and they needed to finish what they had started by other means. Marco handled the boats. The Russos owned 3 vessels. Vincent's primary boat, a 42-footer named the Maria Teresa after his mother. Dominic's 32-footer, the Rosa Marie, named for his wife. And an older boat, a 28-foot skiff that they used for short runs and backup when one of the larger vessels was in for repairs. All 3 boats needed to be ready. Engines checked, fuel tanks filled, running lights disabled. Marco spent 2 full days going over every system, making sure nothing would fail at the wrong moment. Making sure they could move fast and quiet when the time came. Anthony was given the hardest job: surveillance. For 3 days, he watched the Carvalho operation, followed their boats out of the harbour, keeping far enough back that they would not notice, tracked their patterns, noted their schedules, confirmed that October 17th would unfold the way Vincent predicted. He came home each night exhausted, not physically. The work was not hard, but the weight of what he was doing, the knowledge that he was studying these men so that his family could end them, pressed down on him like something solid. He slept poorly, ate little, spoke only when spoken to. On the night of October 15th, Vincent found his middle son sitting on the back porch, staring out at the darkness, a bottle of whiskey open beside him. Vincent sat down next to him, did not say anything at first, just sat there in the cold October night, letting the silence do what silence does. After a while, Anthony spoke. "I watched Paulo Carvalho today," he said. "The youngest one. He is maybe 19, 20 years old. He has a girl. I saw them together on the pier before he went out. She kissed him goodbye, told him to be careful." Vincent waited. "He is not much older than Marco," Anthony continued. His voice was flat, hollow, the voice of a man who has seen something he cannot unsee. "He is somebody's son, somebody's boyfriend, probably somebody's brother, and in 2 days we are going to make sure he never comes home." Vincent took a breath, let it out slowly. "You think I do not know that?" he asked. "I think you have decided not to think about it." "No, I think about it all the time. I think about Manuel Carvalho's wife, waiting at the kitchen table for a husband who will not come back. I think about his sons, who will never get the chance to grow old. I think about all of it, Anthony. Every day, every night. It does not change anything. How can it not change anything? Because they made their choice. They were warned. They were given every opportunity to walk away. They chose to stay. They chose to keep taking from us. They chose this. They chose to feed their families. So did we." Vincent's voice hardened. "We chose to feed our families too. We chose to protect what our grandfather built. We chose to pass something on to our children and our children's children. The difference is that we were here first. The difference is that those waters belong to us. The difference is that we tried everything else before we came to this. And that makes it right? It makes it necessary. Right and wrong are luxuries, Anthony. They are words people use when they have the option to choose. We do not have that option. We have survival. That is all. Survival for our family or survival for theirs. One or the other, not both." Anthony poured himself another whiskey, drank it in one swallow, set the glass down carefully on the porch railing. "I keep thinking about what happens after," he said. "Assuming we get away with it. Assuming nobody catches us. We still have to live with it. Wake up every morning knowing what we did. Look at ourselves in the mirror. Look at our children." "You learn to live with it," Vincent said quietly. "I learned. In Vietnam, I did things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. Things I cannot tell your mother. Things I cannot tell anyone. And I lived with them. I came home. I married your mother. I raised you and your brothers. I built a life. But it never goes away," Anthony said. "Does it?" It was not a question. Vincent answered it anyway. "No, it never goes away. You carry it with you like a stone in your pocket. Some days you forget it is there. Some days it weighs so much you can barely stand. But you keep going. You keep putting one foot in front of the other. Because that is what men do. That is what Russos do. Father and son sat together in the darkness. The stars were out, sharp and cold, scattered across a sky that did not care about anything happening beneath it. After a long time, Anthony stood up. "I am not going to back out," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever I feel, whatever doubts I have, I am not going to leave you or Dominic or Marco to do this without me. We are family. That means something. I know it does. But I need you to understand something too." Anthony looked down at his father. His face was hard to read in the starlight. "When this is over, when we have done what you are asking us to do, I am not going to be the same person. None of us are. We are going to break something that cannot be fixed. And we are going to have to live with that broken thing inside us for the rest of our lives." Vincent nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "I wish there was another way." "There is not." "No, there is not." Anthony went inside. Vincent stayed on the porch, looking up at the stars, thinking about all the broken things he carried inside himself. All the pieces of who he used to be that had been shattered in the jungles of Vietnam and never put back together. His son was right. There would be no coming back from this. Not really. They would survive, probably. They would avoid prison, probably. They would go on living their lives, raising their families, working the waters that would finally belong to them alone. But they would not be the same. Something would be gone. Something that could not be replaced or repaired or recovered. That was the price. That was always the price. The code demanded it. The sea demanded it. The simple, brutal mathematics of survival demanded it. Vincent accepted the price. He had accepted it a long time ago, in another place, in another life, when he was young enough to believe that accepting such prices was the same as being strong. Now he was not so sure. But it was too late for doubts. Too late for second thoughts. The machinery was in motion. The countdown was running. In 48 hours, everything would change. He sat on the porch until the cold drove him inside. Then he went to bed and held Angela and tried not to think about what was coming. He failed. The morning of October 16th, the day before the night, Vincent woke early, even by his standards. 3:30 in the morning, dark outside the windows. Angela still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, running through the plan one more time, looking for holes, looking for problems, looking for anything he might have missed. The plan was simple. Simple plans were better. Fewer things to go wrong. The Carvalho boats would leave the harbour around 8 in the evening. They would motor out to their fishing grounds, spread across 15 square miles of open water. By 10 o'clock, they would be settled into their positions, hauling traps, focused on the work. The Russo boats would leave at 11. Late enough that the harbour would be quiet. Late enough that no one would notice 3 boats slipping out into the darkness. They would approach the Carvalho vessels one at a time, quietly, without running lights. The fog would help. October fog off Cape Ann could be thick enough to hide a boat until it was right on top of you. The method was the key. Vincent had thought about it for weeks. How to disable 5 boats without firing a shot. How to make it look like an accident, or at least like something other than what it was. The answer was elegant in its simplicity. Every boat has vulnerabilities, fuel lines that can be cut, through hull fittings that can be loosened, bilge pumps that can be disconnected, radio antennas that can be snapped off. A boat with a severed fuel line cannot run its engine. A boat with a loosened through hull fitting takes on water slowly, then quickly, then catastrophically. A boat without a working bilge pump cannot stay afloat once the water starts coming in. A boat without a radio cannot call for help. Do all 4 things, do them quickly, do them quietly, and the boat becomes a death trap. The men on board will not even realize what has happened until the water is at their ankles. By then, it will be too late. 5 boats, 12 men, 3 hours of darkness. Simple. Vincent got out of bed, went downstairs, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the chart spread out in front of him, the same chart he had been studying for days. He was still sitting there when the sun came up. Still sitting there when Angela came down at 6:30, wrapped in her robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at him, at the chart, at the coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. "Today is the day before," she said. It was not a question. Vincent nodded anyway. Angela sat down across from him, reached out and took his hands. Her fingers were warm, his were cold. He had not noticed how cold he had gotten. "I have something to say," she said, "and I need you to listen." Vincent waited. "I know why you are doing this. I understand the reasons. I have lived in this town my whole life. I know what the code means. I know what happens when someone takes from a family like ours." She squeezed his hands. "But I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow night, whatever you do, I will still be here. I will wait for you. If you come home, I will be waiting. If you do not come home, I will wait anyway. If you go to prison, I will visit every week until one of us is gone. That is my promise to you. Angela, I am not finished." She held up a hand. "I also need you to know that I am afraid. Not of the law, not of what people will say. I am afraid of what this will do to you, to our sons. I have watched you carry the weight of what happened in Vietnam for 12 years. I have seen what it costs you, every nightmare, every time you disappear inside yourself and I cannot reach you. Every drink you pour at 2 in the morning when you think I am asleep." Her eyes were wet now, but her voice stayed steady. "After tomorrow, there will be more weight, more nightmares, more darkness you carry alone because you think you are protecting me. And I need you to know that I see it. I see all of it. And I love you anyway. Not despite what you are about to do, not because of it, just because you are my husband, the father of my children, the man I chose 30 years ago and would choose again today." Vincent felt something crack open in his chest, something he had been holding together for weeks, maybe for years. He pulled Angela toward him, held her, buried his face in her hair and breathed in the smell of her, soap and lavender, and something underneath that was just her, just Angela, the only woman he had ever loved. "I am sorry," he said. The words came out rough, broken. "Do not be sorry. Just come home. Whatever you have to do tomorrow, do it and come home. That is all I ask. I will try. You will do more than try. You will come home to me. You will walk through that door, and I will be here, and we will figure out the rest together. Promise me. I promise." They held each other for a long time. The sun climbed higher. The coffee grew colder. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and a car engine started, and the world went on doing what the world does, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in kitchens and bedrooms and hearts. Finally, Angela pulled back, wiped her eyes, stood up. "I am going to make breakfast," she said. "Real breakfast. Eggs and bacon and toast. You are going to eat it. Then you are going to rest. I do not care if you cannot sleep. You are going to lie down and close your eyes and let your body recover some of what it will need tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am." Angela almost smiled. Almost. Then she turned to the stove and started pulling out pans, and the moment passed, and they were just a husband and wife in a kitchen on an October morning, doing ordinary things, pretending that everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. Vincent ate the breakfast Angela made, every bite. It tasted like nothing, like cardboard, but he ate it anyway because she had asked him to and because he needed the fuel. Then he went upstairs and lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling for 6 hours. He did not sleep. He had known he would not sleep. But he rested as much as he could, let his body go still even as his mind raced through the plan again and again and again. At 3 in the afternoon, Dominic came by the house. Rosa was with him and the children. Vincent played with his grandchildren in the living room while Dominic and Angela talked quietly in the kitchen. The boy, Vincent Jr., was 4 years old. The girl, Maria, was 2. They did not understand why their grandfather was holding them so tightly. They did not understand why his eyes kept getting wet. At 5 o'clock, Anthony stopped by. He did not stay long. Just came in, hugged his mother, shook his father's hand. His eyes were clear now. The doubt Vincent had seen 2 nights ago was gone, replaced by something harder. Determination, maybe, or resignation. The face of a man who has made peace with what he is about to do. Marco came last, at 6:30. He was nervous. Vincent could see it in the way he moved, the way his hands would not stay still. But he was not backing out. He was not running away. He was there with his family, ready to do what needed to be done. They ate dinner together, all of them except Dominic's family, who had gone home. Angela served roast chicken and potatoes and green beans from a can. Nobody talked much. There was nothing left to say. Everything had been said already, in the kitchen 5 days ago, in the conversations since. Now there was only the waiting. After dinner, Vincent went upstairs. Changed into dark clothes, wool pants, heavy sweater, work boots that had seen 1,000 trips on the water. He looked at himself in the mirror, saw an old man looking back, an old man with tired eyes and scarred hands and the weight of what was coming pressing down on his shoulders. He went into the closet, reached behind the winter coats, pulled out the rifle case he kept there, the one Angela pretended not to know about. The Winchester felt familiar in his hands. He had carried this rifle through 3 tours in Vietnam, had cleaned it 1,000 times, had used it in ways he did not let himself think about anymore. He checked the action. Smooth. Perfect. The rifle was ready. So was he. At 9 o'clock, Vincent called his sons into the living room. They stood in a circle, 4 men bound by blood and by what they were about to do. "You know the plan," Vincent said. "We have been over it 12 times, but I am going to say it once more, because tonight there is no room for mistakes." He looked at each of them in turn. "Dominic, you take the Rosa Marie. You handle the 2 boats working the northern sector, Paolo and Carlos Carvalho. Anthony, you take the skiff. You handle the boat in the eastern sector. Roberto Carvalho. Marco, you are with me on the Maria Teresa. We handle the 2 boats in the southern sector, Manuel and Joaquin Carvalho. We leave at 11. We approach without lights. We do what needs to be done. We are back in the harbour before dawn." He paused. "If something goes wrong, if the Coast Guard shows up, if one of the Carvalho boats spots us before we can get to them, we abort. We turn around. We come home. We try again another night. The goal is to finish this, but the bigger goal is to come home. Understood?" 3 heads nodded. "One more thing." Vincent's voice dropped. "What we do tonight stays between us, forever. We do not talk about it. We do not write about it. We do not tell our wives or our children or our priests. 50 years from now, when we are old men and this night is ancient history, we still do not talk about it. It goes with us to the grave, all 4 of us. Agreed?" "Agreed," Dominic said. "Agreed," Anthony said. "Agreed," Marco said. Vincent nodded. "Then let us get it done." They walked out of the house together. Angela was standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the October cold. She did not say anything, did not call out, did not wave. She just watched, her husband, her sons, walking away into the darkness. Vincent looked back once, just once, saw her standing there in the light from the doorway, small and alone and waiting. Then he turned and kept walking. The harbour was quiet when they arrived. Most of the boats were tied up for the night, their crews home with their families, resting before the next day's work. The only sounds were the creak of ropes and the slap of water against hulls, and the distant cry of a gull that had not found a place to roost. The 3 Russo boats were moored in a row at the end of the pier. Vincent had moved them there 2 days ago, clustering them together so they could leave quickly and quietly when the time came. They loaded their gear, rifles wrapped in canvas, tool bags filled with wire cutters and wrenches and everything else they would need. Extra fuel in jerry cans strapped to the decks. At 10:45, Vincent started the engine of the Maria Teresa. The diesel rumbled to life, loud in the quiet harbour, then settled into a steady throb. Dominic started the Rosa Marie. Anthony started the skiff. 3 engines, 3 boats, 4 men. At 11 o'clock exactly, Vincent cast off the lines. The Maria Teresa eased away from the pier. Dominic followed in the Rosa Marie. Anthony brought up the rear in the skiff. They moved slowly through the harbour, past the other boats, past the breakwater, out into the open water where the fog was waiting. The night swallowed them whole. October 17th, 1981. 11:14 in the evening. The fog was thick enough to taste. It rolled across the water in grey walls, swallowing everything more than 30 feet from the bow. The running lights were off, had been off since they cleared the breakwater, and the Maria Teresa moved through the darkness like a ghost ship, guided only by compass and memory, and the knowledge that Vincent Russo had accumulated over 40 years on these waters. Marco stood beside his father at the helm. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The plan had been discussed and refined and rehearsed until every step was automatic. Now there was only the doing. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees. Cold enough that their breath made small clouds in the air. Cold enough that the metal fittings on the boat were slick with condensation. Cold enough that the water, when the time came, would do most of the work for them. Vincent checked his watch. 11:17. They were running slightly ahead of schedule. Good. Better to have time to spare than to be rushing when precision mattered most. Somewhere out in the fog, separated by maybe 2 miles of open water, Dominic was piloting the Rosa Marie toward the northern sector. Anthony was taking the skiff east. 3 boats, converging on 5 targets from different directions, timed to arrive within minutes of each other. The first part of the plan was simple. Find the Carvalho boats, approach without being seen, get close enough to board. The second part was harder. Vincent had explained it to his sons in clinical terms. Every fishing boat has the same basic systems. Engine, fuel, bilge pump, radio. Disable all 4, and the boat becomes helpless. It cannot run. It cannot pump out water. It cannot call for help. Then you open the through hull fittings, the valves that let seawater in for engine cooling and other purposes. Open them all the way, and the ocean starts pouring in. Slowly at first, then faster, then unstoppably. A boat with open through hulls and no bilge pump will sink in 20 to 40 minutes, depending on size. The men on board will have time to realize what is happening, time to try to fix it, time to understand that they cannot fix it, time to put on life jackets and prepare for the water. But a life jacket only keeps you floating. It does not keep you warm. And in 52-degree water, warmth is everything. Hypothermia sets in within an hour. Confusion, loss of coordination, muscles that stop responding to commands, the body shutting down piece by piece as the cold steals heat faster than the metabolism can replace it. 2 hours in that water, maybe 3, and the heart stops. That was the plan. Not violence, not blood, just physics. Just the simple, terrible mathematics of cold water and disabled boats and help that would arrive too late to matter. 11:31. Vincent cut the engine to idle. The Maria Teresa drifted in the fog, barely moving, silent except for the soft lap of waves against the hull. He could see lights ahead, faint, diffused by the fog, but definitely lights. Work lights on a fishing boat, someone hauling traps. Manuel Carvalho. It had to be. This was his sector, his coordinates. The waters he had stolen from the Russo family and worked as if they belonged to him. Vincent picked up the binoculars, adjusted the focus. The fog made everything blurry, but he could make out the shape of a boat. 40 feet, maybe 42. Two figures moving on deck. Manuel and one of his sons, probably Joaquin, working together, hauling the traps that should have been Russo traps, taking the catch that should have been Russo catch. Marco touched his father's arm, pointed to the left. Another set of lights, fainter, maybe a quarter-mile away. The second Carvalho boat in this sector. Good. They were both here. Both where they were supposed to be. Vincent checked his watch again. 11:36. The rendezvous time was midnight. He had 24 minutes to get into position. He eased the throttle forward, just enough to give the Maria Teresa steerage way, just enough to close the distance without making noise that would carry across the water. The fog helped. Sound behaved strangely in fog. Sometimes it carried for miles, sometimes it disappeared within feet. Tonight, the fog was swallowing everything. The rumble of the idling engine faded to nothing within 100 yards. 11:42, 200 yards from the nearest Carvalho boat. Close enough to see the two men on deck clearly now. Manuel, shorter and broader, working the hydraulic hauler. Joaquin, taller and thinner, sorting the catch into bins. They were talking. Vincent could not hear the words, but he could see their mouths moving. Father and son, working together, the way he had worked with his own father, the way he worked with his own sons. For a moment, just a moment, something twisted in Vincent's chest. Something that might have been doubt, might have been guilt, might have been the last protest of a conscience that knew what was about to happen was wrong, whatever justifications he had built around it. Then he remembered the traps, the empty traps with someone else's gear in their place. The catch that had been stolen day after day for months, the calls to the Coast Guard that went nowhere, the warnings that were ignored, the choice that Manuel Carvalho had made when he decided to keep taking what was not his. The doubt faded, the guilt retreated. What remained was cold and hard and certain. Vincent cut the engine entirely, let the Maria Teresa drift on momentum and current. In the fog, in the darkness, the boat was invisible. Just another shadow among shadows. 11:51, 50 yards out. Close enough to hear Manuel's voice now, calling something to Joaquin. Close enough to smell the bait on their deck, the particular stink of fish parts that had been sitting in buckets all day. Marco moved to the bow. He had the grappling hook ready. A soft throw, a quiet catch, and they would be alongside the Carvalho boat before anyone knew they were there. Vincent checked his watch one final time. 11:58, 2 minutes to midnight. Somewhere out in the fog, Dominic would be approaching the northern sector. Anthony would be closing on the eastern target. 3 Russo boats, converging on 5 Carvalho boats, the timing precise to the minute. Midnight. Vincent raised his hand, held it there for a 3 count, then dropped it. Marco threw the grappling hook. It arced through the fog, trailing rope, and caught the Carvalho gunwale with a soft metallic thunk. Manuel's head came up. He turned toward the sound, peered into the darkness. What the hell was that? Joaquin stopped sorting, looked at his father, looked at the fog surrounding them. I did not hear anything. Something hit the boat. Manuel moved toward the rail, toward the place where the grappling hook had caught, toward the darkness where the Maria Teresa was drifting closer, invisible, silent. Vincent pulled the rope, hand over hand, smooth and steady, closing the gap between the 2 boats. 20 feet, 15, 10. Manuel reached the rail, looked over the side, saw nothing but fog and black water. Then the Maria Teresa emerged from the darkness like something from a nightmare, and Manuel Carvalho finally understood what was happening. Russo. His voice was barely a whisper. Then, louder, Jesus Christ. Russo, what are you doing? Vincent did not answer. He stepped from his boat to the Carvalho boat in a single smooth motion. Marco followed, tool bag in hand. Manuel backed away. His eyes were wide, his hands were shaking. Listen to me, Manuel said. Whatever you are thinking, whatever you are planning, we can talk about this. We can work something out." "We tried talking," Vincent said. His voice was flat, empty. The voice of a man who has already made his decision and is simply executing the steps. "You did not listen. I will listen now. I swear to God, I will listen now. Just tell me what you want. What I want is my waters back. What I want is the last 6 months of catch you stole from my family. What I want is impossible now." Vincent turned to Marco. "Engine first, then fuel line, then bilge pump, then radio. Move fast." Marco nodded. He disappeared below deck, tool bag over his shoulder. Manuel started toward the companionway, toward his son who was working below decks. Vincent stepped into his path. "Your boy comes up here," Vincent said. "Both of you. On deck. Now. You cannot do this." Manuel's voice cracked. "This is insane. This is murder. Call your son. Russo, please. I have a family. I have grandchildren. I have. So do I." Vincent's voice did not change. "Call your son. Now." Manuel turned toward the companionway. "Joaquin," he called. His voice shook. "Joaquin, come up here, right now." A moment passed, then footsteps on the ladder. Joaquin emerged from below, confusion on his face. "What is going on?" Then he saw Vincent, saw the expression on his father's face. His confusion turned to fear. "Who is this? Papa, what is happening?" "Stay calm," Manuel said. "Everything is going to be fine. Just stay calm." Below deck, Marco worked fast. Vincent could hear him moving through the boat, the clang of tools against metal, the hiss of a fuel line being severed, the click of wires being cut. 5 minutes. That was the target. 5 minutes per boat. Disable the systems, open the through hulls, get out, move to the next target. Repeat. Manuel was watching Vincent with desperate eyes. "What are you going to do to us? I am not going to do anything to you. The sea is going to do it." Manuel's face went white. "You are sinking us. You are sinking us out here, miles from shore, in the middle of the night." Vincent said nothing. "We will freeze." Manuel's voice rose. "We will freeze to death in that water. You know that. You know exactly what you are doing." "I know. This is not justice. This is not the code. This is murder, cold-blooded murder. You should have thought about that before you stole from me." "I was trying to feed my family." Manuel was shouting now. "I was trying to survive. That is all. That is all I was ever trying to do. So am I." Marco emerged from below. His face was pale but set. "Done," he said. "All 4 systems. Through hulls are open. We have maybe 20 minutes before she goes down." Vincent nodded. He backed toward the rail where the Maria Teresa was waiting. "Get your life jackets," he said to Manuel. "Both of you. Get them now. The cold will take you eventually, but the jackets will keep you floating. Give the Coast Guard a chance to find you. You know they will not find us in time." Manuel's voice was hollow. "You know exactly how long it takes to die in that water." Vincent swung himself over the rail, dropped onto the deck of his own boat. "I know," he said. Then he turned to Marco. "Cast off. We have 4 more boats to hit." The Maria Teresa disappeared into the fog. Behind them, Manuel Carvalho's voice rose in a scream that was swallowed by the darkness. 12:22 in the morning, the second boat in the southern sector. This one was Joaquin's boat, worked alone most nights, a smaller vessel that could be handled by a single fisherman. But tonight, Manuel's second son had company. A deckhand Vincent did not recognize. Some friend or cousin brought on to help with the double shift. 2 men. Vincent had planned for 1. It did not change anything. The plan was the plan. The numbers were the numbers. 1 more body in the water would not make a difference to the outcome. They approached the same way, silent, dark, emerging from the fog like apparitions. Joaquin saw them first. Unlike his father, he did not try to talk. He simply ran, dove for the companionway, trying to get below, trying to reach something. A weapon, maybe, or a radio, or just a place to hide. Marco caught him before he reached the hatch, grabbed the back of his jacket and hauled him down to the deck. Joaquin struggled, thrashing and kicking, but Marco was bigger and stronger and had the advantage of surprise. The deckhand was frozen, standing by the bait tank, mouth open, eyes wide, unable to process what was happening. Vincent walked past him without a word, went below, disabled the systems, opened the through hulls. 5 minutes of work, same as before. When he came back up, Marco had Joaquin pinned against the gunwale. The deckhand had not moved. "Life jackets," Vincent said. "Both of you. Put them on." Joaquin spat at him. "You killed my father. Your father is not dead yet. He has maybe an hour, maybe 2 if he is lucky. Same as you. You are a monster." Vincent did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. "Life jackets," he repeated. "Or do not. It is your choice." He stepped back onto the Maria Teresa. Marco followed. They cast off and disappeared into the fog while Joaquin screamed curses that faded to nothing within 100 yards. 12:47. Radio check. Vincent keyed the handheld radio. Short range, encrypted frequency, the kind of radio that would not be picked up by Coast Guard monitoring. Dominic. Status. Static. Then his son's voice, flat and controlled. Northern sector complete. Both boats disabled. 4 men in the water. 4. Dominic had found 2 extra crewmen as well. The body count was climbing. Anthony. Status. More static. Then Anthony's voice, rougher than Dominic's, a tremor underneath the words. Eastern sector complete. 1 boat. 3 men. 3? Vincent frowned. Roberto Carvalho usually worked alone. He had crew tonight, brothers or cousins. I do not know. They are all in the water now. Vincent did his calculations. Southern sector, 4 men counting the unexpected deckhand. Northern sector, 4. Eastern sector, 3. 11 men in the water. 1 more boat to find. Where is the 5th boat? Vincent asked. Manuel said they were running 5 tonight. Silence on the radio. Then Dominic's voice. I have not seen it. Maybe they changed the schedule. Or maybe it never left port, Anthony added. Vincent considered. 5 boats had been the plan. 5 boats, 12 to 15 men, the entire Carvalho fishing operation wiped out in a single night. If 1 boat was missing, the plan was incomplete. But 11 men were already in the water. 11 men who would not survive until dawn. The Carvalho operation was crippled regardless. Manuel and his sons were gone. The cousins and deckhands were gone. Whoever was on the 5th boat, if there was a 5th boat, would not be able to rebuild what had been lost. Good enough. It would have to be good enough. Return to harbour, Vincent said into the radio. Separate routes. Arrive separately. Tie up and go home. We do not speak of this again. Copy, Dominic said. Copy, Anthony said. Vincent set down the radio, looked out at the fog. Somewhere behind him, 11 men were floating in 52-degree water, watching their boats sink, realizing slowly that help was not coming. He felt nothing. That was the strangest part. He had expected something. Guilt, satisfaction, horror. Something to mark the magnitude of what he had done. Instead, there was only emptiness. A vast grey void where his emotions should have been. Maybe the feelings would come later. Maybe they were waiting for him somewhere down the road, gathering strength, preparing to crash over him when he least expected it. Or maybe this was who he really was, who he had always been, underneath the family man and the fisherman and the churchgoer. A man capable of sending 11 people to their deaths and feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of a debt finally paid. He did not know. He was not sure he wanted to know. Marco stood beside him at the helm, silent, staring into the darkness. Pop, he said finally. Yeah, I think I am going to be sick. Then be sick. But do it over the side. I do not want the deck dirty when we get back. Marco made it to the rail just in time. Vincent heard him retching into the water, the sound loud in the quiet night. He did not turn around, did not offer comfort. did not say any of the things a father should say to a son who has just helped end 11 lives. There would be time for that later. Or there would not. Either way, the work was done. The Carvalhos were finished. The Russo waters belonged to the Russos again. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. 1:14 in the morning. Manuel Carvalho was still alive. He was floating in his life jacket, somewhere in the darkness, unable to see anything but fog and black water. Joaquin was beside him, or had been. They had drifted apart in the first few minutes, and now Manuel could only hear his son's voice, calling out every few minutes, making sure they had not lost each other entirely. The cold had started in his feet. That was always where it started, the extremities, the parts of the body farthest from the heart. His toes had gone numb within the first 15 minutes. His fingers followed soon after. Now the numbness was creeping up his legs, past his ankles, past his calves, a slow tide of nothing that would eventually reach his core and stop his heart. He had been in the water for maybe 45 minutes. He knew roughly how much time he had left. An hour, maybe. 90 minutes if he was lucky. He was not going to be lucky. Papa. Joaquin's voice, somewhere to his left, weaker than it had been. Papa, I cannot feel my hands. I know, son, I know. Are we going to die out here? Manuel closed his eyes. The truth was yes. The truth was that they were already dead, had been dead from the moment Vincent Russo stepped onto their boat. The water was just taking its time finishing the job. But a father does not say that to his son, not even at the end. We are going to be fine, Manuel said. The Coast Guard will find us. Someone will come. No one is coming, Papa. You know that. No one even knows we are out here. Someone will come. They floated in silence. The fog pressed in around them. The cold crept higher. Manuel thought about his wife, Rosa. She would be sleeping now, or trying to sleep, waiting for him to come home the way she always waited. In a few hours, when the sun came up and he was not there, she would start to worry. By noon she would be frantic. By evening she would know. He thought about his other sons, Carlos and Paulo and Roberto. Were they in the water too? Had Russo gotten to all of them? Or were some of them safe, home in their beds, unaware that their father and brother were dying in the darkness? He thought about the choices that had brought him here, the mill closing, the mortgage payments, the desperation that had driven him to buy a boat and try to make a living from the sea. He thought about Vincent Russo's warnings, the confrontation in the driveway, the chance he had been given to walk away. He had not taken it. He had chosen to keep fishing, chosen to keep fighting for his family, chosen to believe that the law would protect him, that the code Russo talked about was just words, just threats, just the bluster of an old man who could not accept that the world had changed. He had been wrong. Papa. Joaquin's voice again, fainter now. Papa, I am so cold. I know, son. I do not want to die out here. I do not want to die in the dark. You are not going to die. Manuel's voice broke. He could not help it. The lie was too heavy to carry anymore. You are not going to die. But they were. They both knew it. The cold was coming for them, patient and relentless, and there was nothing either of them could do to stop it. Manuel started to pray. The words came automatically, the prayers his mother had taught him as a child in the Azores, the prayers he had said every night before bed and every morning before work, and every time the sea got rough and he thought he might not make it home. He was still praying when the numbness reached his chest. He was still praying when his heart began to slow. He was still praying when the darkness finally closed in and there was nothing left but cold and silence and the distant sound of his son calling his name. 2:41 in the morning. The first call came into the Coast Guard station at 2:43. A fishing boat called the Mary Ellen, working the waters about 5 miles north of the Carvalho positions, had picked up something on their radio. Faint, garbled, but definitely a distress call. Mayday, mayday. The voice on the recording was weak, barely audible over static. Taking on water. Position. The voice faded, came back, Cannot. Radio. Someone. Please. Then nothing. The Coast Guard dispatcher tried to raise the vessel. No response. Tried again. Still nothing. At 2:51, they dispatched a cutter from Boston. Estimated time of arrival, 90 minutes. At 3:15, a second distress call came in. Different frequency, different voice. Same desperate message. Help. We are in the water. Our boat sank. There are. The voice broke off, static. Then, very faintly, so cold. The dispatcher requested the position, got no response. The signal was too weak, the equipment too damaged, the man on the other end too far gone to provide coordinates. At 3:22, the dispatcher made the call that would bring every available vessel in the area to the search. All ships, all ships. This is Coast Guard Sector Boston. We have reports of multiple vessels in distress off Cape Ann. All ships are requested to assist in search and rescue operations. Repeat, multiple vessels in distress. The response was immediate. Fishing boats that had been working through the night changed course and headed toward the search area. Private vessels monitoring the emergency frequency turned their bows north. The Coast Guard cutter increased speed, pushing through the fog at maximum throttle. But the search area was 15 square miles of open water. The fog reduced visibility to near zero. The men in the water had been floating for hours, drifting on currents that scattered them in random directions. At 4:17, the first body was recovered. Carlos Carvalho, 29 years old, father of two, found floating face down in his life jacket 3 miles from where his boat had gone down. At 4:31, the second body, Roberto Carvalho, 26 years old, unmarried, found by a fishing boat from Rockport, tangled in a piece of floating debris. At 4:58, 4:59, and 5:03, 3 more bodies. Joaquin Carvalho, Paulo Carvalho, a deckhand named Miguel Santos who had been helping out for extra cash. At 5:22, the Coast Guard cutter found what was left of Manuel Carvalho's boat. The hull was floating just below the surface, air trapped in a compartment keeping it from sinking completely. No survivors aboard, no bodies either. Just empty deck and rising water and the smell of diesel fuel leaking from a severed fuel line. By 6 in the morning, when the sun finally broke through the fog and the search area became visible for the first time, 8 bodies had been recovered. By noon, the count was 11. By sunset, it was 12. 12 men, 12 bodies, 12 death certificates that would list the cause as drowning, secondary to hypothermia, consistent with maritime accident. But it was not an accident. The Coast Guard investigators knew that within hours of arriving at the scene. The damage to the boats was too uniform. Fuel lines cut in the same place, through hull fittings opened in the same sequence, bilge pumps disabled in the same way. Radio antennas snapped off at the same angle. Someone had done this. Someone who knew boats, someone who knew these waters, someone who had moved through the fog like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but sinking vessels and dying men. The investigation would take months. The questions would multiply. The suspicions would coalesce around a single name, whispered on the docks, murmured in the bars, spoken aloud only behind closed doors. Russo. But suspicion was not evidence, and in Gloucester, in October of 1981, nobody was talking. The Maria Teresa tied up at the Russo slip at 3:47 in the morning. Vincent killed the engine and sat in the silence for a long moment, hands still on the wheel, staring at nothing. It was done. 11 men in the water, maybe 12 if the 5th boat had gone out after all. By now, most of them would be dead. The rest would follow within the hour. The Carvalho operation was finished. The waters that had belonged to the Russo family for 60 years belonged to them again. The debt had been paid. The code had been satisfied. Vincent felt nothing. He had expected something, some reaction, some emotion, some evidence that what he had done mattered beyond the simple calculus of survival. But there was only emptiness, only silence, only the slow understanding that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the crossing had changed nothing inside him at all. Maybe he was already broken. Maybe Vietnam had broken him years ago, and tonight was just another piece added to the wreckage. Maybe there was no version of Vincent Russo who could feel what he should feel after sending 12 men to their deaths. Or maybe the feelings would come later, tomorrow, next week, next year. Maybe they were building somewhere deep inside him, gathering strength, waiting for the moment when he thought he was safe before they rose up and destroyed him. He did not know. He was too tired to know. Marco had stopped being sick somewhere around 2 in the morning. Now he sat slumped against the cabin wall, eyes closed, face pale, breathing slowly and steadily. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. Pop. His voice was barely a whisper. Is it over? It is over. Are they? Marco swallowed. Are they all gone? They are all gone. Marco opened his eyes, looked at his father. There was something in his expression that Vincent did not recognize, something that had not been there 12 hours ago. I thought I would feel different, Marco said. I thought I would feel. I do not know. Something. Anything. But I just feel empty. I know. Does it get better? Vincent considered the question, thought about the years since Vietnam, the nightmares, the drinking, the moments when he would disappear inside himself and Angela could not reach him. No, he said finally, it does not get better, but you learn to carry it. You learn to keep moving. You learn to be who you need to be for your family, even when you do not feel like a person anymore. Marco was quiet for a long time. I am not sure I can do that, he said. You can. You will. Because you are a Russo. Because you have a family that needs you. Because there is no other choice. Vincent stood up. His legs were stiff. His back ached. He felt every one of his 51 years pressing down on him. Go home, he said. Get some sleep. Do not talk to anyone. Do not answer the phone. When the news breaks, you will be as surprised as everyone else. Understood? Understood. Marco climbed off the boat, walked up the pier, disappeared into the darkness. Vincent stayed where he was, stood on the deck of his boat, looking out at the harbour, watching the first grey light of dawn begin to show in the east. Somewhere out there, the bodies were floating. The Coast Guard was searching. The families were starting to worry. And in a few hours, Gloucester would wake up to the worst maritime disaster in its recent history. 12 men lost. 12 families destroyed. 12 empty seats at kitchen tables. 12 names to be carved into the memorial on Stacy Boulevard. Vincent had done that. He and his sons. They had reached out across the water and ended 12 lives with nothing but wire cutters and wrenches and the cold mathematics of the sea. He should feel something. Guilt, remorse, horror. Something to mark the weight of what he had done. But there was only emptiness, only silence, only the slow grey dawn breaking over a harbour that looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Vincent Russo stood on his boat and watched the sun come up and felt nothing at all. 6 hours after the last body was pulled from the water, Helen Marcos opened the door of her coffee shop on Main Street and found Gloucester changed. She had owned the shop for 23 years, had seen good times and bad times, had watched the fishing industry rise and fall and rise again, had served coffee to 3 generations of fishermen, men who came in before dawn smelling of salt and diesel, men who talked about weather and catch and the 1,000 small details that made up a life on the water. She had never seen anything like this. The shop was full by 6:30, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the silence. Normally the morning crowd talked, argued, laughed. The noise level rose with the caffeine, voices overlapping, stories competing for attention. This morning nobody spoke above a whisper. Helen heard fragments. 12 men, all of them, the Carvalhos, gone. She did not ask questions, did not push for details. She just poured coffee and made change and watched the faces of men she had known for decades, men who looked like they had seen something they could not unsee. By 8 o'clock, the story had spread through the entire town. 12 fishermen lost in a single night. 5 boats sunk within hours of each other. The worst maritime disaster in Gloucester since the storm of 1978, which had taken 7 men in a single gale. But the storm of 1978 had been weather, nature, the kind of tragedy that fishing families understood, that they had been preparing for since the first settlers dropped nets into these waters 3 centuries ago. This was different. This was not weather. The night had been calm. The fog had been thick, but fog did not sink boats. Something else had happened out there. Something that nobody wanted to name, but everybody understood. By noon, the whispers had coalesced into a single word. Russo. Nobody said it out loud. Not yet. The investigators had just arrived. The Coast Guard and the state police and the federal agents who would spend the next 6 months trying to prove what everyone already knew. But in the coffee shop and the hardware store and the church parking lot after the noon mass, the name passed from mouth to mouth like a secret that had already stopped being secret. Russo did this. Russo finally settled the score. Russo showed everyone what happens when you take from a family that does not forget. The reactions were not what an outsider might have expected. There was grief, of course. 12 men were gone. 12 families had been shattered. The Carvalho wives and mothers and children walked through town like ghosts, pale and silent, surrounded by relatives who did not know what to say because there was nothing to say. But underneath the grief, there was something else. Something that looked almost like understanding. Something that sounded almost like approval. He warned them, someone said in Helen's coffee shop around 3 in the afternoon. An old man named Joseph Terrio, 82 years old, who had fished these waters since before the Second World War. Manuel Carvalho knew what he was doing, knew whose waters he was fishing, knew what would happen if he did not stop. That does not make it right, someone else said. A younger man, maybe 40, who worked at the processing plant. Nobody said it was right, Joseph replied. I said he was warned. That is a different thing. 12 men are dead. 12 men who stole from a family that has been here for 60 years. Joseph shook his head slowly. I am not saying I agree with what Russo did. I am saying I understand it. There is a difference. The difference, as far as Helen could tell, was that nobody was rushing to help the investigators. Nobody was volunteering information. Nobody was pointing fingers or naming names or doing any of the things that people normally do when a crime of this magnitude has been committed. Gloucester was closing ranks. The same way it had closed ranks 100 times before, when the outside world came asking questions about things that happened on the water. The code of silence was older than the town itself, older than the country, a remnant of fishing communities that had learned centuries ago that the law could not be trusted and outsiders could not be relied upon. Whatever Vincent Russo had done, he had done it to protect his family. That mattered. In Gloucester, that mattered more than anything. The investigation began on October 18, 1981, approximately 14 hours after the first distress call. Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander David Chen was 43 years old and had spent 18 years investigating maritime incidents along the New England coast. He had seen accidents and incompetence and bad luck. He had seen storms that came out of nowhere and equipment that failed at the worst possible moment. He had seen all the ways the sea could kill a man. He had never seen anything like this. 5 boats, 12 men. All in the same night, all within a few miles of each other, all with the same pattern of damage. Chen stood on the deck of the Coast Guard cutter, looking at the piece of wreckage his divers had just brought up. A section of hull from one of the Carvalho boats, cut clean where a through hull fitting had been removed. Not loosened, removed. Someone had taken a wrench to that fitting and opened it all the way, deliberately, methodically, knowing exactly what would happen when the seawater started pouring in. He examined the other pieces of evidence. Fuel lines that had been severed with wire cutters. bilge pump switches that had been disconnected, radio antennas that had been snapped off, not by impact or weather, but by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. This was sabotage. Deliberate, premeditated sabotage designed to sink 5 boats and ensure that the men on board could not call for help, could not pump out the incoming water, could not do anything except wait to die. Chen had seen crimes before, had helped investigate drug smuggling and illegal fishing and the occasional assault that happened when tempers flared on the water. But this was different. This was methodical. This was cold. This was the work of someone who had planned every detail and executed every step with the precision of a military operation. The interviews began on October 19th. State police detectives, working alongside Coast Guard investigators, fanned out across Gloucester, knocking on doors, asking questions, looking for anyone who knew anything about what had happened that night. They found nothing. The fishermen they interviewed were polite, cooperative, and completely unhelpful. Yes, they knew the Carvalho family. No, they did not know of anyone who had a grudge against them. No, they had not seen or heard anything unusual on the night of October 17th. No, they could not imagine who would do something like this. The same answers, over and over, from dozens of different people. The same blank expressions, the same careful neutrality, the same absolute refusal to provide any information that might point toward a suspect. Detective Robert Harrington of the Massachusetts State Police was 51 years old and had been investigating homicides for 23 years. He knew what a wall of silence looked like. He knew the particular quality of a community that had decided, collectively and without discussion, that certain things would not be spoken about to outsiders. Gloucester had become that wall. "Someone knows," Harrington told Lieutenant Commander Chen on the evening of October 21st. They were sitting in the conference room of the Gloucester police station, surrounded by charts and photographs and interview transcripts. Someone saw something, someone heard something, but nobody is talking. "What about the Russo family?" Chen asked. Harrington shook his head. "We interviewed Vincent Russo yesterday. He was polite, cooperative, claimed he was home all night on October 17th. His wife confirmed it. His sons confirmed it. They all have alibis, all have each other as witnesses, and none of them gave us anything we can use. The boats? We checked their boats this morning. All 3 are clean. No evidence of recent use, no damage consistent with the kind of work we are looking at. Either they are very good at covering their tracks, or we are looking in the wrong direction." "We are not looking in the wrong direction," Chen said quietly. "You know it, and I know it. Everyone in this town knows it. Russo did this. He had the motive, he had the skills, he had the knowledge of these waters. He had everything except the evidence. Then we find the evidence. How? Nobody is talking. The physical evidence is at the bottom of the ocean. The only witnesses are dead." Harrington stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the harbour, at the boats tied up at their slips, at the town that had decided to protect one of its own. "We keep digging," he said. "We interview everyone again. We check every boat in the harbour. We pull phone records and bank statements and anything else we can get a warrant for. Somewhere, somehow, Russo made a mistake. We just have to find it." But Vincent Russo had not made a mistake. The investigation continued for 6 months. Investigators interviewed more than 200 people. They examined every boat in Gloucester Harbour. They analysed the wreckage, traced the equipment, checked alibis and phone records and financial transactions. They found nothing. Or rather, they found plenty of circumstantial evidence. The confrontation between Vincent and Manuel Carvalho in August. The 14 calls Vincent had made to the Coast Guard and Harbour Master, documented and time-stamped. The testimony of witnesses who had seen Vincent warn Manuel about the consequences of continued trespassing. But circumstantial evidence was not enough. Without witnesses, without physical evidence linking the Russos to the sinking boats, without something concrete that could be presented to a jury, there was no case. On April 14, 1982, the investigation was officially closed. The cause of the sinkings was listed as undetermined. The deaths were ruled accidental, pending discovery of new evidence. The file was placed in a drawer where it would sit for decades, reopened occasionally when a new lead surfaced, closed again when the lead went nowhere. Vincent Russo was never charged, his sons were never charged, nobody was ever charged. The 12 men who died in the waters off Cape Ann on October 17, 1981, died without justice. Their families grieved without closure. Their names were added to the memorial on Stacy Boulevard, carved into stone alongside the 10,000 other fishermen who had been taken by the sea. The sea. That was how people talked about it, even years later. The sea took the Carvalhos, as if the ocean itself had reached up and pulled those men down into the darkness. As if what happened that night was nature, not murder. As if the cold and the water and the fog were responsible, not the hands that had cut the fuel lines and opened the through hulls and disabled the radios. The sea took them. That was the story Gloucester told itself, the story it would keep telling for decades. But everyone knew the truth. Everyone had always known. Vincent Russo stood in his kitchen on the morning of April 15, 1982, reading the newspaper article that announced the closing of the investigation. Angela was at the stove making breakfast. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the room, the same smell that had filled the room every morning for 30 years. Ordinary, normal, the small rituals of a life that had continued somehow, despite everything that had happened. "It is over," Vincent said. Angela did not turn around. "Is it? The investigation is closed. They are not going to charge us." "That is not what I asked." Angela's voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of a woman who had learned to say difficult things without breaking. "I asked if it was over." Vincent set down the newspaper, looked at his wife's back. At the grey hair she now wore pinned up instead of loose, at the slight stoop in her shoulders that had not been there a year ago. "No," he said, "it is not over. It will never be over." Angela turned around, met his eyes. Her face was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that had been building for 6 months, ever since the night he had walked out the door and come back a different man. "I need to know something," she said. "I need you to tell me the truth." Vincent waited. Was it worth it? The question hung in the air between them. The same question the investigators had asked. The same question his sons had asked, in different ways, at different times. The same question he had asked himself every night when he lay awake in the darkness, listening to Angela breathe beside him, waiting for sleep that rarely came. Was it worth it? 12 men were dead. Their families were destroyed. Their children would grow up without fathers. Their wives would grow old without husbands. And the Russo family? The waters were theirs again. The catch had recovered. The income was steady. The territory that had been stolen was once more secure. But Dominic barely spoke anymore. Anthony had started drinking, heavily, the kind of drinking that led to trouble. Marco had nightmares that woke him screaming in the middle of the night. And Vincent himself. Vincent felt like a man who had been hollowed out, like someone had reached inside him and removed everything that made him human, leaving behind only the shell that walked and talked and went through the motions of living. The waters belonged to the Russos again. But at what cost? "I do not know," Vincent said finally. "I thought I was protecting us, protecting our family, protecting everything my grandfather built. I thought if I just handled it, if I just did what needed to be done, everything would be all right. And now? Now I am not sure anything will ever be all right again." Angela walked to him, put her hands on his face, made him look at her. "We are still here," she said. "You and me, our sons, our grandchildren. We are still here, still together, still a family. Whatever you did, whatever you carry, you are not carrying it alone. I told you that the night before. I am telling you again now. I am here. I will always be here." Vincent felt something crack in his chest, something that had been frozen since October, since the night on the water, since the moment he had stepped onto Manuel Carvalho's boat and set everything in motion. He pulled Angela close, held her, let himself feel, for the first time in months, something other than emptiness. "I love you," he said. His voice broke on the words. "I know. I am sorry. I know that too." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while the bacon burned on the stove and the newspaper sat forgotten on the table, and the morning sunlight streamed through the windows of a house that had seen too much sorrow and too little peace. Outside, Gloucester went on with its business. Boats left the harbour. Fishermen worked their grounds. The memorial on Stacey Boulevard stood silent, bearing the names of 10,000 dead, 12 of them freshly carved. The sea took them. That was what people said. But Vincent Russo knew the truth. The sea had not taken them. He had. And he would carry that knowledge for the rest of his life. The years that followed were quiet. Not peaceful, but quiet. The particular silence that settles over a family that has been through something it cannot discuss, cannot process, cannot ever fully leave behind. Vincent continued fishing, rose every morning at 4:30, made his coffee, walked to the harbour, took his boat out past the breakwater and worked the waters his grandfather had claimed 60 years before. The catch was good, better than it had been in years. Without the Carvalho boats competing for the same territory, the Russo operation had more room to work, more fish to catch, more money coming in than at any time since the industry's peak. It should have felt like victory. It felt like nothing at all. Dominic took over more of the daily operations as the years passed. By 1985, he was running the business in all but name, handling the logistics and the sales and the maintenance, while Vincent went through the motions of work that no longer seemed to matter. Rosa gave birth to their third child, a daughter, in the spring of 1982. They named her Angela, after Vincent's wife. The baby was healthy, beautiful, a new life that seemed to promise that the family could move forward, could heal, could become something other than what they had become. Vincent held his granddaughter and felt nothing. That was the cruelest part. Not the guilt, not the nightmares, not the weight of 12 lives pressing down on him. The cruelest part was the nothing, the absolute absence of feeling where feeling should have been. He was hollow, empty. A man shaped like Vincent Russo, walking through a life shaped like Vincent Russo's life, but with nothing inside to give any of it meaning. Angela saw it. She tried to reach him, tried to pull him back from wherever he had gone, but there was no reaching him anymore. He was present, but not there. Alive, but not living. Going through the motions of a life that had ended on a foggy October night in 1981. Anthony's drinking got worse. By 1984, he was showing up to work late or not at all, smelling like whiskey, hands shaking until he got a few drinks in him. Rosa threatened to leave. Dominic threatened to cut him out of the business. Vincent said nothing. What was there to say? Anthony was trying to drown the same memories that Vincent carried, the same faces that appeared in the darkness when you closed your eyes, the same voices that called out from the water, asking for help that would never come. In 1986, Anthony drove his car off the road on Route 128. Lost control on a curve, the police said. Alcohol was a factor. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks with a broken leg and a shattered collarbone and internal injuries that took months to heal. It was not an accident. Vincent knew that. Anthony knew that. The whole family knew, though nobody said it out loud. Anthony stopped drinking after that, got help, started going to meetings in a church basement in Beverly, where nobody knew his name or his family or what he had done on a foggy October night 5 years before. The meetings helped. Slowly, painfully, Anthony started to become something like the man he had been before. Not the same man. That man was gone forever. But something close, something that could function, something that could look his children in the eye without wanting to disappear. Marco left Gloucester in 1983. said he needed a fresh start, needed to get away from the water and the harbour and the memories that saturated every street and building and face he passed. He moved to California, got a job at a marina in San Diego, started over as much as anyone ever really starts over. He called Angela every Sunday, talked for an hour about nothing in particular, weather and work and the small details of a life being rebuilt 3,000 miles away. He never called Vincent, never wrote to him, never acknowledged his father's existence in any way. Vincent understood. He did not blame Marco. How could he? He had asked his youngest son to become something no young man should ever have to become, had led him into the darkness and left him there to find his own way out. Some wounds did not heal, some distances could not be crossed, some silences lasted forever. The Carvalho family scattered after the tragedy. Rosa Carvalho, Manuel's widow, sold their house in the spring of 1982 and moved to New Bedford, where she had relatives who could help her piece together what was left of her life. She never remarried, never fully recovered. Friends said she walked through the world like someone who had left the largest part of herself somewhere else and was just waiting for the rest to follow. She died in 1997 at the age of 64. Heart failure, the doctors said. But everyone who knew her understood that Rosa Carvalho had died the same night her husband did. Her body had just taken 16 years to catch up. The Carvalho children grew up without fathers. Miguel Santos's daughter, 3 years old when her father drowned, was raised by grandparents who spoke his name like a prayer and his death like a curse. Some of the children stayed in Massachusetts. Others scattered across the country, running from a tragedy they could never outrun. One of Manuel's grandsons, born a year after the sinking, would grow up to become a commercial fisherman himself. He would work the same waters where his grandfather died, not knowing or perhaps not caring that the territory beneath his boat had once belonged to the man who killed his family. The sea does not care about human tragedy. The fish do not remember who caught them or who failed to catch them. The tides rise and fall according to their own rhythms, indifferent to the blood that has been spilled in their depths. Life goes on. That is the cruelest truth of all. No matter how much we suffer, no matter how many we lose, no matter how deep the wounds we carry, life goes on. Vincent Russo died on February 3rd, 2004. He was 73 years old. The end came slowly, as these things often do. A cough that would not go away. A diagnosis that explained everything and changed nothing. Months of treatment that bought time but not hope. In the end, he died in his own bed, in the house his father had left him, with Angela holding his hand and his sons standing vigil around him. He had not spoken for 2 days when the end came. The cancer had spread to his throat, stealing his voice before it stole his life. But in the final hours, as his breathing slowed and his grip on Angela's hand weakened, he opened his eyes one last time. He looked at his wife, at his sons, at the room where he had slept for 60 years, where he had loved and worried and dreamed and done all the things that make up a human life. His lips moved. No sound came out, but Angela leaned close, trying to hear what he was trying to say. She never told anyone what his final words were. When Dominic asked, later that night, she simply shook her head and said, "It was between him and me. Some secrets are meant to be kept. Some words are meant to stay where they are spoken, in the space between two people who have shared a life and are now watching that life end." Vincent Russo was buried in the Calvary Cemetery on 3 days later. The funeral was small, family and a few close friends. No politicians, no dignitaries, no representatives from the fishing industry he had worked for half a century. Angela stood at the grave, flanked by Dominic and Anthony. Marco had flown in from California, standing slightly apart, the distance between him and his family visible even in the way he held his body. The priest spoke the usual words: dust to dust, ashes to ashes, the promise of resurrection and eternal life. Then it was over, and the mourners dispersed, and Vincent Russo was left alone in the ground he had walked for 73 years. Angela lived for another 7 years. She died in 2011 at the age of 79, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew her only as a gentle old woman who made good coffee and told stories about the old days. She never spoke about October of 1981, never mentioned the Carvalhos or the investigation or the months and years that followed. It was as if that chapter of her life had been sealed away, locked in a box that would be buried with her. She was laid to rest beside Vincent in a plot they had purchased together 40 years before. The headstone was simple, their names, their dates, the words beloved parents carved in stone. No mention of what Vincent had done, no acknowledgement of the 12 men whose deaths he had caused. Just names and dates and a silence that would last forever. Dominic took over the family business after his father's death. He ran it for another 15 years, until the fishing industry's continued decline made the operation unprofitable. He sold the boats in 2019. The Maria Teresa, named for Vincent's mother, went to a fisherman from Rockport who planned to use it for charters. The Rosa Marie, named for Dominic's wife, was sold for scrap, its engine worn out and its hull too damaged to repair. Dominic is 72 years old now. He still lives in Gloucester, in the house where he raised his children. He does not fish anymore. His knees are bad, his back is worse. The years of hauling nets and lifting traps have taken their toll. But sometimes, on foggy October mornings, he walks down to the harbour and stands at the end of the pier, looking out at the water where his family made their living for 4 generations. He thinks about his father, about his brothers, about the night that changed everything and the years that followed. He does not talk about it, has never talked about it, will never talk about it as long as he lives. Some things are better left unspoken. Some memories are better left undisturbed. Some secrets are meant to die with the men who carry them. Anthony got sober in 1986 and stayed sober for the rest of his life. He worked the boats until his body gave out, then took a job at the marina, maintaining engines and repairing hulls and doing the kind of work that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. He died in 2018 at the age of 63. Heart attack, sudden and massive. He was found in his workshop, slumped over an engine he had been rebuilding, a wrench still in his hand. His wife said later that he had been happier in those final years than at any time since his youth. That whatever demons had haunted him had finally fallen silent. That he had found, if not peace, then at least a truce with the past. Marco never came back to Gloucester. He built a life in California, married a woman he met at the marina, raised 2 children who grew up knowing nothing about their grandfather, or the waters off Cape Ann, or the night in October 1981. He is 65 years old now, retired from the marina, living in a small house near the beach with his wife and a dog named Captain. He does not fish anymore. Has not fished since the night he helped his father sink 5 boats and watched 12 men slip beneath the water. Some things you cannot go back to. Some parts of yourself, once broken, stay broken forever. The Russo property still stands on its hill overlooking the harbour. Dominic lives there now, alone since his wife passed in 2016. The house is quiet. The rooms that once held generations of family are mostly empty now. But if you walk through the kitchen in the early morning, when the light is just starting to show in the east, you can almost see Vincent sitting at the table with his coffee and his cigarette. Can almost hear Angela moving around the stove, making breakfast. Can almost feel the presence of all the people who lived and loved and suffered within these walls. The harbour is different now, smaller, quieter. The fishing industry that built Gloucester has declined, and the town has reinvented itself as a tourist destination, a place for summer visitors and weekend sailors and people who want to experience the quaint charm of a New England fishing village. They do not know about October 1981. Do not know about the 12 men who died, or the family that killed them, or the silence that has lasted for more than 40 years. They walk past the memorial on Stacy Boulevard without reading the names. They take pictures of the bronze fisherman without understanding what he represents. They eat lobster at waterfront restaurants without wondering whose hands caught it or whose waters it came from. The past is invisible to them, as it should be, as it must be if life is to go on. But the past is not gone, it never goes away. It lives in the memories of the people who were there, in the silence of the families who know the truth, in the water itself, which remembers everything and forgives nothing. The sea took them. That is what people still say when they talk about the Carvalhos at all. The sea took them, but the sea did not take them. A man took them. A man who believed he was protecting his family. A man who followed a code that was older than any law. A man who crossed a line that should never be crossed and spent the rest of his life carrying the weight of what he had done. Vincent Russo was not a monster. He was a father, a husband, a fisherman who worked the same waters for 50 years and asked nothing from the world except to be left alone to provide for his family. But he was also something else. Something that emerged on a foggy October night when desperation and rage and the ancient code of the sea combined to create a tragedy that destroyed not 12 lives, but dozens. The victims, their families, his own family. Everyone touched by the ripples of that single terrible decision. Was he justified? The law says no. 12 counts of murder, never charged, never tried, never punished. Was he understandable? The fishermen of Gloucester, the ones who knew the code and lived by it for generations, would say yes. They would say that Manuel Carvalho knew the risks, knew the consequences, made his choice and paid the price. Was it worth it? That is the question that has no answer. The question Vincent asked himself every day for 23 years. The question his sons still ask themselves in the quiet moments when the past refuses to stay past. The waters off Cape Ann belong to no one now. The territorial system that governed fishing for generations has broken down, replaced by government regulations and catch limits and all the machinery of modern fisheries management. The old code is dying. The men who lived by it are dying too, one by one, taking their knowledge and their silence with them to the grave. In another generation, maybe two, there will be no one left who remembers what happened in October 1981. No one who knew Vincent Russo or Manuel Carvalho or any of the 12 men who died in the cold, dark water. The sea will keep its secrets. It always does. But the truth remains, whether anyone remembers it or not. The truth of what men will do to protect what they love. The truth of how far desperation can push a person. The truth of the line between justice and revenge, between protection and destruction, between being a man who provides for his family and being a man who takes from others. Vincent Russo crossed that line. He knew he was crossing it. He accepted the consequences and carried them for the rest of his life. Was he right? Was he wrong? Was he something in between, a man caught in circumstances he did not create, making choices that no person should ever have to make? The answer depends on who you ask. And in Gloucester, even now, more than 40 years later, nobody is asking. Some questions are better left unspoken, some truths are better left buried, and some nights, on the water off Cape Ann, when the fog rolls in and the temperature drops and the buoys clang in the darkness, you can almost hear voices calling from the deep. Help us, save us. We are so cold. But there is no one to help, no one to save, no one to answer the calls that echo across the water and fade into silence. The sea took them. That is the story Gloucester tells, and the sea keeps its secrets forever.